Today's episode is brought to you by elitefts.com. Founded in 1998 with the primary aim to live, learn, and pass on. Please help Elite FTS support this mission by smashing the like button, leaving a comment, sharing with a friend, and thinking of us for your training needs. If you can put it in a gym bag or load weights on it, Elite FTS has it.
What's going on? I'm Dave Tate. We are broadcasting from the middle of the Elite FTS weight room, where the underground still thrives and you're part of the crew. It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. Back with another episode of Table Talk. Before we get started, shout out to our sponsor, Merrick Health. Merrick Health is a premium telehealth platform specializing in hormone optimization and preventative medicine. For you guys that haven't seen the show before or haven't heard me talk about Merrick Health before, they do this through two different means. One is a self-service blood profile. So how do we go about explaining this to somebody that doesn't know what they're thinking about? So if you feel like shit, if you can't sleep, if your health markers are off, if you think something's off and you need blood work done, or if you're taking anabolics, or you think that you may need to take anabolics, or your health is just a disaster and you're working with a primary care physician that has no idea what you need to do, because every time you walk in, they're like, oh, you lift weights, so you must take testosterone, so you're going to be biased, and they're not going to listen to what your actual health concerns are, then this is kind of where Merrick Health falls into play. So the self-service labs, if you go to americhealth.com/table talk, you'll see the labs that I created with them to be able to go over all the basic stuff, the cholesterol, the hormones, everything that you would need to get a kind of a good bird's eye view on where your health markers are. If you just do the self-service package, right? I'm trying to think of, like, is it a product? It's not a product because it's a service. If you just do the self-guided service, you can get a report with that. With the report, when I had mine done, it was about 56 pages, which sounds a lot, but what the report does is tell you what each of these tests are, what the markers are, where your markers fall, and what you can do to either optimize it, or if it's good or not optimized. So it lays it all out with what potential solutions can be. So it's not just getting the blood panel done like I've done for years through other companies, and then you have your blood panel and you're like, oh, maybe I should show this to my online coach, which is fucking stupid, by the way. Not only that, it can come back to hurt you a few years later, as we just saw with the Liver King getting blasted all over the place because he sent his shit to somebody without, so, bear that in mind if you're working with any online coaches. That's a potential problem that can happen down the line. It won't happen with Merrick Health because they're actually a primary telehealth platform. They also have guided optimization, which is where when people ask me about Merrick Health, I always push them towards that. And with that service, what you get is you still get the blood work done, but it may be more comprehensive, maybe less comprehensive than what the self-service panel is. That blood work is determined by working with your patient care coordinator, which isn't a doctor. So keep in mind, keep following, because I know everybody's going to start time stamping after this is over, but keep listening to what I'm going to say right now. So if you have a person in between you and the actual physician, now you have somebody that you can actually be honest with about everything that you do. And then when you speak to the physician, that information will be pushed onto them, but you're not going to be in this real weird spot where the physician's put into this weird corner, like, oh, this guy's blasting tons of tren, I need to tell him not to take tons of tren. Where I don't want to say the gatekeeper, but the middleman is the key to this whole thing, because that's your point of contact. You're going to have more points of contact with that person than you will the actual physician or nurse practitioner, or whoever's going to write the prescriptions. Once you go through that, and then you'll meet with the doctor and the patient care coordinator, and they will help to determine what prescriptions you need, what supplements you need, and so forth. So americhealth.com/table talk, highly recommend it. I've been using them now since March, when they stepped up to sponsor the podcast when we came back for season 3. The other sponsor, obviously, is elitefts.com. Our limited edition apparel goes to help support the podcast, as does the Table Talk Coffee, as does the crew, which I talked about that a little bit a couple episodes ago. We set up a Table Talk crew, which is basically a way to support the podcast, is how it started, but it has expanded since then. What the crew is now is, once we hit our first benchmark, which we're about 80% of the way there now, there will be episodes just for crew members. Those episodes more than likely will be Q&As that I will answer from them. Where the first one I know for a fact we're going to do is going to be on auto-regulation, what you need to pay attention to, and how to auto-regulate your own training. Because if you've been following the podcast, that's a benchmark and a theme that comes across with every great lifter, every athlete, every coach that we've had since doing the podcast to begin with. You also become part of the Discord server that we have, that we currently have 24 ebooks on. There's form checks, there's programs, there's workouts, there's discussion groups. There's probably other things that I'm forgetting about too. I check in on it about 3 times a day. So if you go to the description, you'll see join the crew, click on that. I think the cost for that is under 37 cents a day. So it's very affordable and it helps support the podcast. With all that behind me, my guest today is Brandon and Adrian Smitley. And Brandon is the co-owner. See, my notes are screwed up because you just came on here. Like, they are owners. They are owners of Thirst, which is a training facility located in, say the city name.
Terre Haute.
Terre Haute, because I know I was going to screw that up. So Terre Haute. And Brandon's been part of Elite FTS for almost a decade now. So he's filled every role that we have with the company, from athlete to coach to columnist. So I've known him for damn near close to a decade. When I looked the other day, I was like, shit, fuck, I'm old. Yeah. You know, it's kind of that wake-up call. But I wanted to have him on because there's a lot of stories, there's a lot of information that we can get from this, from the training perspective, where he has had, the squat was an all-time world record at the time,
yes,
right?
Yes.
So all-time world record squat. Still competes now, not as actively as before, but you know, the numbers are big. You know, you're looking at 567 squat at 132. So do the math on that. It's like insane. And then totals as well. And then working his way into the coaching. I think when we first met, you may have even still been a student. It's just graduated.
Yes, I was in grad school.
So in grad school, and it's gone from, you know, being a grad student in exercise science or some related field like that, physical education and coaching, to having his own facility. And, you know, watching the progress from that point to now has been a hell of a journey to watch. You know, there's been some bumps along the way.
Oh, yeah.
You know, which we'll talk about as well. And she's helped tremendously,
yep.
you know, along the way with that. So where I want to start, because there's so many different avenues to go down here, is the basic question is like, how did you get started in powerlifting, right? I'm about ready to dump that question because everybody gets asked that all the time. What I'll ask is what made you decide that strength and conditioning or powerlifting was going to be a primary focus in your life?
Probably when I was in high school, when I used lifting to get better at sports. So ironically, I'm 5'1". I thought I was going to play basketball, and I found wrestling, and I was like, this is just way better. So I picked up the weight room piece to help me be a better athlete. I was behind on mat time, but I loved being in the weight room, so I thought I could use this to benefit my wrestling career, and that definitely did help. And then once wrestling was out of my life, I still needed that competitive piece. I loved the one-on-one part of wrestling. I loved being able to go on a mat, and if I lose and get my ass kicked, it's because that guy was better than me. It wasn't the ref, it wasn't the coaching, it wasn't anything else. It was me and another person, where with team sports, that kind of gets lost a little bit. I liked that, even though I was a team sport athlete as a kid. So powerlifting and bodybuilding is kind of what I kind of look at. It's like, I like the lifting weights part. I started looking into bodybuilding, and then powerlifting came because I was just naturally strong, and I was like, I'm better at this than I am the dieting and whatever else. I want to get on a platform and see what I can actually do besides just doing it in the gym by myself. So, and then obviously I took it to school to take it to the next level to actually do something with it with my life.
When did the competing come into play?
So I did a local bodybuilding show in 2008, I want to say. And I had somebody give me some general rundown, but I honestly had no idea what I was doing. I was literally pulling stuff out of Muscle and Fitness magazines for training programs. I was using diet recommendations on where my calories should be going into a show and stuff like that, and really I just used it to keep my weight down. Being a wrestler, I was somebody that was really small, and so when I put weight on, I wanted to have it come off. And then that's kind of how that got started, and then that eventually snowballed into the powerlifting piece.
Well, I think according to Open Powerlifting, your first meet is 2013, I believe.
That was my first sanctioned meet, yes.
All right, so were there meets before that were not sanctioned?
Yes, correct. Yeah, there were some push-pulls.
Okay, then when did that?
2011, I believe, was my first one.
All right, so we're looking at over a decade there.
Yeah, yep.
So how did that powerlifting come in? Because the bodybuilding, everybody can find that.
Yep.
Right? Powerlifting is not as easy to find because you're not
Right.
like walking through and seeing magazines
Right.
of powerlifting. So how did that happen?
So when I was at Purdue, there was a group of us that trained in the rec center that were serious about our training. We kind of stick out like a sore thumb. You know, the way we lift, obviously, we squat well, we bench well, better than most people. The weights are obviously significantly heavier. So I made some friends with some guys that I'm still friends with today, and they're like, you know, you're obviously pretty good about bodybuilding. You've got some good proportions, but man, you are strong for your size. Have you ever thought about doing powerlifting? I was like, I only knew of it from T Nation at the time. And I was like, you know, I know what it is, but I never really thought about it. I didn't know how to get started in it. I was just, when I found out about powerlifting, gear was still predominant over raw. And I was like, you know, I don't understand this gear stuff. And they're like, oh, you can do a raw meet. And so that's kind of how that snowballed. And then I eventually found Elite FTS and you through T Nation. And I just took a deep dive into the articles. And I was like, man, I know I'm learning a lot of stuff in school about this, but this is a whole different level. Mm-hmm. So then I said, well, I need to find a meet to do. And I couldn't find anything in Indiana. At the time, Indiana sucked for powerlifting in the early 2000s. Everything was in Ohio and Illinois. And I was at Purdue. And I was like, I'm not trying to travel super far to get meet experience for the first time. So I just found a really local thing down by home, and it was literally a push-pull, and I was like, I'm just going to do just bench press, and that's what I did. I just did bench press, and I got like 265, and this was I could walk in at 132 still, so I was still a small guy. I wasn't cutting weight then, and that was, you know, still pretty good, but people were like, you know, I got best lifter there because I was double body weight bench just walking in, and that's when I kind of like, I like this is competitive, and then I added the deadlift piece. That's when I still deadlifted conventional. It was my worst lift even on the squat, but they were only push-pull meets, so I didn't get a chance to squat. And then after I did another one, I did a push-pull combined, won that one, and then I started hunting for my first full power meet, which was the one that was in 2013.
And what was that one?
That was a NASA meet. So that was, I think NASA and USAPL were the only two people, and this was before USAPL is what it is now.
Yeah.
And so the NASA one was in Kokomo, so that was, you know, an hour-ish plus a little bit more away from Purdue, so it wasn't that far. And they literally laid tarps down on the floor to YMCA, and I mean, it was definitely a first-time experience, and nobody was there to help handle me or anything like that. I just walked in, did the meet, and I think at that time, that total was 14th all-time at 132 with literally just walking into a meet and not knowing what I was doing.
Yeah. So before you went into that meet, I'm trying to think of all the questions that we've been asked all the time, right? Like, how do I go into my first meet? You know, so did you have those, if you can remember, because it's a decade ago, right? Can you remember what prompted you to actually do it? Because look at the questions that we get, like, hey, look, I'm thinking about doing my first meet. What should I do? Right. So I'm not asking you how you would answer that question. What I'm asking is, what did you do?
So when I got on Elite FTS, I found about preparing for a meet.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't train with people. I don't have gear. So I I sent off the entry form, and I was like, everything I read said to open light. So I think I ended that meet at like low 400. So I probably opened in like the 350 range on squat. That's the one that comes to mind. And then I just watched videos and tried to read about the rules. And then went to the rules meeting, you know, paying as much attention as I could, and people are still helpful at meets, and so that's why I kind of just undershot my openers on everything, and I was like, you know what, I just know I need to squat low, listen to what the judges say, and cross my fingers and hope for the best. And I just snowballed my lifts after that. I was like, I can go up a little bit, 15, 20 pounds here or there, and then, you know, the last one's, you know, with the meet, I knew I was in the meet, so I was like, I just started sending them on the last one just to have fun because I wanted to do something heavier than I'd ever done in training.
All right, now you fast forward a couple years and you're at Raw Unity.
Yep.
Right, and then 3 years you're at
did the Arnold twice.
Arnold twice.
Yep.
So, how did you navigate that increase?
So that was, I did a couple meets between that one and the first one, and really that's like I got my feet wet. Then it came about breaking PRs from those meets. I was like, I got solid numbers on the board. I would just find anything again that was in like Indiana. I think I did one that was in far west Ohio. And then after coming out here, that's when, at the time, Brian Carroll was like, you need to do the Unity meet. I think you can take on Richard Hawthorne. And I'm like, what? Like, okay, this is one of the best power lifters that's 165 pounds and under that's walked the planet. And he's like, I think you can take him. We need to dial in your training a little bit. And at the time, Brian was helping me. And that went really well. And that's why I was like, that was the biggest step. I was having to start to cut a little bit of weight to make the weight classes. And that's kind of where things snowballed. Because after I was beating Richard going into deadlift, and I think I was the first person to ever do that in years. But obviously he pulled the shit out of me. And I knew that was coming. But so I tried to, make smart attempts with Brian's help and Bob Young's help of getting every pound I could on him. I was like, well, I'm going to out squat him and I'm going to out bench him by a lot. But can I do enough? And then he still beat me in the total piece. But I was like, I can be good at this. If I can hang with that guy, give me a couple more years, get my training better and all things like that, and I can hang with the best.
Now, at that time, were you still a student?
I finished grad school in basically the summer of 2014. So yes, I was still a grad student at that time.
All right. So how did you manage training and?
Oh fuck.
Because I'm sure you had to work too, right?
Yes. So I was a grad student. So it was weird. I was at Rose Hallman for my graduate assistantship, but my schooling was through Indiana State because Rose Hallman is an engineering school, but they still needed people to run the recreation center and do things like that. And this was at the point where I realized I didn't want to do collegiate strength and conditioning. I wanted to own my own facility. So I took a position to where I was managing students and helping run the weight room and the actual student recreation center. So I was like, I'm getting the managerial and how things should run. I got to organize events. I thought that was going to be more applicable. And so basically I would train in their weight room because I had the keys. So I could do that when I wanted. And then I started to train a little bit out of my garage as well because the local places at the time, the one place was on like the 5th floor. So you couldn't deadlift at all. That was basically, you had to set it down nicely. And I was like, okay, this isn't going to work. There was not a good support system. Nobody knew anything about powerlifting. So I basically took it in my own hands, the training at Rose Hallman, started training in my garage, and I used the rec center at Indiana State because I had free access to that as well. So I basically kind of hopped based upon what my training was at the time, but I almost always at least had access to barbells, racks, and general machines at the time.
Were you training by yourself most of that
yes,
time?
Yes, 100%. Yep, I had no training partners at the time.
All right, so you didn't have to worry about, because you have to take classes, right?
Yes, yep.
So it's when I go back to when I was in college, I had my training scheduled first, and then I take the classes whenever it didn't screw up the training, where you could actually plan the classes first.
Yeah. And with grad school, you don't have as much options, and there's not full time is 9 hours in grad school, which from a class perspective is nothing. You should be excited to go to class because you're getting a graduate. I mean, it's all what you want to do. It's not hard for me to walk in the classroom and be engaged, so that wasn't a problem.
Okay. When did you guys meet?
2016, correct?
Yes. Yep. 2016. I was finishing my senior year.
And I had already graduated. That's when I was personal training at Indiana State. So I was the primary personal trainer that trained the faculty and staff. They got tired of having turnover of using students that didn't know what they were doing, so they hired me to train nothing but faculty and staff. So I was usually there, early morning, 6 a.m., working with all the teachers and staff members, and then I get the afternoon kind of off. That's when I would do either my conditioning or light accessory work stuff, come back in the evening, train a couple more people, and that's what my day usually looked like. And that's how I met her, because she was working the fitness floor at the time.
Okay. So the competing was still a primary part of your life when you met?
Oh, yeah. I was deep into it when I met her. Yeah.
Okay. And then that was, 2-3 more years until...
Yep.
It's still a priority in your life. It's just a different priority.
Yep, definitely,
you did compete last year, I believe, right?
Yeah, I did bench meet, yep.
But it's not
the
first.
Right, yeah.
The first priority. So you meet him when it's his first priority, right? So...
Yeah.
with that odd question, right? I mean, you're supporting it, obviously.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're kind of thinking, like, when's this shit gonna not be the top priority?
Actually, so I didn't even know what powerlifting was until I met Brandon. And I trained, but like, I feel like everybody always starts in like bodybuilding stuff. And it was like, I put it first. Like, I was like, I feel better when I do this. I know that I need to. But honestly, like, I was so busy because I was working and I had classes and it was my senior year. Like, I was trying to finish. I just, honestly, I think he did a really good job of balancing it, because I don't ever, like, I remember there were times that I would go literally just sit in the garage and do my homework while Brandon was lifting. And
Yeah.
we would just kind of hang out. I've learned more from Brandon than I did in my 4 years of school. So I would just sit there and I'm like, I didn't know what a reverse hyper was. So I'm like sitting on the reverse hyper doing my homework and I'm like, what is this machine?
Well, it's your homework then.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
the drink holder, the book holder.
Yeah. So I think he did a really good job of balancing it. But he was training to break
Worlds.
his
Worlds.
his own world record at the time, which I didn't even really like understand, like comprehend at the time.
And with her going to classes and stuff, and with my work schedule, it was weird because in the afternoon I was free. So, like, if she didn't have class and I was already on campus, we could grab lunch or something like that. And it wasn't like I was missing out on work or training because I knew she was doing stuff and I could train during that time. And I had my garage, so it wasn't like I had to be at this time. I had my preferred training times, but if something came up, it was easier to shift it than it is in my life now, for sure, no question. But
Yeah, it's still different though when you're around fitness, and clubs and stuff like that. The mentality of a top elite powerlifter, it's different.
Yeah.
Right. So it's
Definitely, yeah.
So it had to be like this. You
Yep.
act like you're not you.
Yeah.
But you're like found you, and then you meet you.
Yep.
It's like this is like a little obsessive.
Yeah. Outside looking in, I'm very, very thankful that she stuck around, because I would look at me times and I'm like, man, looking at me like what I did, had to think I was stupid. The way that, like, the cutting weight and like how meticulous I was with my diet then, and how meticulous it was. I walked every single day before it was fancy like it is now. And so I need to go do your walks. I was doing that years before people are doing that now. And like, that's what I did to keep my weight down. I felt better conditioned, but I would do that. Like, she would literally be working and I'd just go walk on the treadmill and talk to her for 5-10 minutes while I was doing my 20-30 minute walk. I mean, it's just I tried to make it work because I found somebody that I connected with really well. And I realized I could make it work just with where my life was then, because a year or two ago, that probably wouldn't happen because I would have been deep in classes and everything else. I didn't have that at the time.
Yeah. At what point in time did you guys start talking about the training facility?
Ooh, well, I have to say, so I was finishing my senior year when I met Brandon, and he already had, like, the name, our brand, our motto. He, like, all the paperwork kind of already planned, because for how many years? And
since Purdue, so 2011.
I don't even remember whenever you first, like, presented it to me. As in, I think you had asked me of, like, if I wanted to own my own facility, and as a stupid, like, 22-year-old, I'm like, oh, I would love to. That would be so great. It'd be so cool.
Yeah, and then it was kind of, I mean, it was definitely before we got engaged, but it was not like you ever had, there was any pushback where she was like, no way, I don't want to do that.
So you were thinking about this years before?
Yeah, so initially I wanted to be in college, strength and conditioning, and after doing several internships, I realized the bounce around stuff, and while I love the atmosphere, it's really hard to duplicate. It was one of those things where, like, I want to have a family. That was something that was important to me. And as much as the big Power 5 guys move around, you see it now this time of year for sure with football, that to me was not appealing whatsoever. And I was like, I'm not going to make somebody that's my partner in life uproot their whole lifestyle so that I can teach kids how to lift weights. Mm-hmm. Like, that's not what I wanted out of it. I wanted to help the kids be better. So how can I plant my feet down and be happy with where I am? And that's what got me into the private sector, and that's how I interned with Will, and that's where I was like, this is definitely what I want to do. So I started to take some ideas from that and then basically start putting it into paper and writing and whatnot. So that would have been 2013. Yeah, 2012, 2013, it would have actually been like more on paper, so to speak. I still had a brand vision, but I didn't have the logistics, where now I had everything from the experience side, the business side, the powerlifting piece was already starting to come in. So I had a way to mold that the way I wanted to look, and then just, took tweaking over those 6-7 years before we opened.
Do you think the grad school helped?
I do, from the like the managerial / trying to like anybody. I don't know if people here know what Rose-Hulman is, but one of the best engineering schools in the country. These kids are so meticulous with math and the way they operate. These kids likely have never had jobs before. They're social constructs. I don't want to say they're broke because Dan Dallenberg, arguably enough, no offense, Dan's pretty normal, but he can definitely testify to this, that just the way they operate is different.
Pretty normal.
Yeah, so how trying to manage people like that was very difficult. And so like, I was like, if I can manage these kids that don't have good social constructs, one, I'm learning how to do it better when I want to work with kids, but then also now I'm running the events and the logistics and how to do all this, because then I was like, now I can start to actually host events and do meets or seminars or whatever I want to do out of my facility, which gives you another option. And then that's where I was like, this is how I can own a gym, because I had to help them move equipment, make rules for the weight room, figure out how things were going to go that way. And then that's kind of where I was like, this is going to help me run the gym, because that's where I need help, because I don't have any education in that whatsoever.
So it wasn't so much what you're learning in the classroom.
I didn't get to the classroom piece. I love the motor learning and that stuff. That was kind of a sidestep for me to be like, okay, well, I've got a master's. It's in something strength and conditioning focused, but the hands-on experience from the grad assistantship was what I needed to do my business, because everybody else I was in school with wanted to be either a strength coach, a cross-country coach, baseball coach, softball coach, and the coaching was what it was at. And so I was like, I want to do that, but I got to own a business too. I don't feel like I need as much help with the coaching, because I've already got a couple thousand hours of interning alone, plus my personal training experience. I don't think I need help on that anymore. I need help with making the facility actually happen. And that's where I thought the grad assistantship would be beneficial, and the managing people part.
Okay. What I'm going back to is, if you would have had this vision, say after high school, right, and then just worked in a gym, but then kept focusing down on that vision, do you think it would have been in the same place?
I don't think so. I think being around the strength and conditioning people that I've been around have really molded the way that I, one, think about training. And while I own a gym that's about training, I think the steps that I did, that kind of let me meet Louie, and eventually let me come out here. I don't think any of this stuff that I have going on in my life would have been possible if I just would have went to the gym and not went to give huge credits to Purdue, the amount of people that I met at Purdue to connect links to make me want to do stuff and push myself. I think that led me towards that trajectory. Could I still be here? Maybe, but I don't think I would be the power lifter or the business owner that I am today.
Well, the indirect question I'm trying to get at is, because nowadays, people are asking, is a degree worth it if this is what you want to do? What you're doing.
Yeah.
And it's a hard question to answer.
It's very hard, yes.
Right? So I just tried to get you to answer without knowing you were being asked.
Yeah.
Where it comes down, I would agree, and I'm far removed from when I was in college, but I would agree it's the connections that you meet and the people that you meet.
And the experiences. To me, the experiences did a lot.
Yeah, and I think you also, you get a baseline, just with the exercise science, you get a baseline education on the basic stuff, because the debate becomes, well, I learned more, I learned more from him in 1 month than I learned through all school, and I don't disagree with that in any way, but you knew what was bullshit and you knew what wasn't. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So which enables you to be able to learn that a little bit better, where I think, at least with my college degree in exercise science and minor in nutrition or whatever the fuck it was, I went to be a strength coach. The same thing you with you, right? It's like, this is what I want to do. Then you're like, oh shit, no, that's not what I want to do. And it enabled me to have a better bullshit detector. That wasn't like the gym bro bullshit detector.
Right.
And I don't know if that's the case now, but
for me, I think it is, and maybe this is just my line of work, but it's also nice because I talk with parents every single day. To be able to have a degree, to them, take it for what you will.
Yeah.
That means more than any certification does, because they're like, well, you went to 4 years. You had to learn something while you were there. You can't be an idiot. You graduated, you got the degree, you had to do some kind of internship experience. You wouldn't be doing this if you just waltzed through it. So I think from a parent perspective on our end, it has a lot more buy-in than any certification would. But like you and I know, the experience part also plays in there too. So to me, you got to have both, I think, to be the most efficient you can be, at least in the private sector. College, obviously the liability piece, they're wanting to see that master's degree, again, to weed people out. Can you do it without that? Maybe. I think you're just going to go up a harder road than if you don't.
you didn't fit the same narrative that a lot of the other lifters fit. That I've been 25 years now or whatever it is. So I've been around sponsoring lifters for a long time, and there's very few that I don't hear, well, I'm not going to do this until I do this. Like I cannot have a training center until I break a world record. I just can't do that because it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Right. You never had that mindset.
No, not
at all. Which was, I think that's important for a lot of other lifters to hear, because like I don't like this no B plan, because they all have a B. Right. Everybody has a B plan. Even if they don't say they do, they do. It's just some stupid catchy statement that they'll be able to put out there. And if I would question how big their A plan is if they don't have a B plan. No, think about this. No, seriously, think about this for a minute, right? Because if your A plan means that you're really all in and you're going to do everything potentially possible for that, then that means there's risk to be able to do that, right? And anybody that's just going to have all risk without being able to have some kind of mitigating part, to me, hasn't gone all risk. Right, even if it's all risk, like, look, I'm going to try something really, really fucking stupid right now, really stupid. You get your phone and dial 911, and just keep it right there. You see what I'm saying? Yep. So it's vast. You see, it's just kind of processing the whole thing, because if you go all here, something else can bottom out, on the other end. You just try to mitigate it. But I can name so many people. It's like I can't do an ebook, I can't do a program, I can't do this, I can't open a gym, and you already kind of have that plan in place.
Right. Yep.
At least mentally.
Mentally, that's what I wanted to do after So I initially started in athletic training, and I was the top of my class. I was really good at it. I mean, that's why I've got a knack for anatomy in terms of training, because that's what I'm really, really good at. I can focus in on that stuff, and I decided to give that up because this isn't what I thought it was going to be. I got tired of wrapping ankles and giving ice and whatnot. So I was like, I'm going to use this to go to physical therapy school. The landscape has changed. If I would have known then what I know now, I would have stuck it out, because now I could do, self-practice. At the time, the cash option wasn't really there. So it was kind of like, oh, I don't want to work with somebody old. And then working with an athlete, man, you better be top of your freaking class at a big school, doing, being in the right places, because being a PT for a pro or college team is very, very hard at that time. Mm-hmm. And that's where everybody wanted to do if you want to work with athletes. Now you can just open up shop down the road and start marketing towards athletes if you got a DPT. So that's when it moved me to strength and conditioning. Like, well, I love training. Let's just take these people out of here. How can I make athletes more resilient, less likely to get hurt, make them perform better, and use the weight room and the sports performance piece? And then obviously getting in the weight room, I was like, this is great. I love training, but I also love helping other athletes not have to get hurt, because I was somebody that tore my MCL when I wrestled. So I know what that's like to have my career in jeopardy, especially in a vital point in my life when I was in high school. So
So going back to when did you start wrestling?
So I didn't pick that up until freshman year. I picked it up literally the second day of school. I was going to basketball workouts, and this guy was like, you're going to play basketball? You're so short. You should try wrestling. I was like, I don't want to be in a singlet. I was like, I love basketball. And he's like, you should come up the track sometime. Just do conditioning with us. We'll see what you have. And I was like, all right, I'll try it. And I smoked people from a conditioning standpoint. Like, I just had a harder work ethic than their kids. I would run more stairs than they would. I would do more push-ups. I'd do more sit-ups. I'd do more pull-ups. And then people were like, dude, you've got the mentality to be good. You just need to get on a mat. So then I got on a mat, tried to learn some of the moves. I kind of got the hang of it pretty quickly because I'd done athletics all my life, so I could run, jump, be quick and explosive. It was a matter of just like getting mat time, and in 2 weeks I beat a junior for a varsity spot just off of my athleticism alone. And so and I weighed 112 pounds. So that's when I was like, well, I got a varsity spot and I'm a freshman. This is a no-brainer, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I went over 500 my first year with hardly any mat time. And that's basically that started snowballing where I could be good at this. And then, like I said, I like the individual piece that I didn't have to rely on my teammates whenever I was out on the mat. If I lost, it was on me. I didn't have to pass that blame, and I like that. There's still a team component in wrestling, obviously, but for me, I like the one-on-one part.
Well, you've done deep dives in strength and conditioning, so you know how children develop throughout the age. How do you think you developed the base conditioning that you had through your childhood?
Well, I kind of told her I want to be like this when I'm a parent. My parents wouldn't let me come inside until it was like 7 o'clock. Yeah. I was outside playing basketball, riding my bike, doing stuff with my sister and other kids in the neighborhood, doing all that stuff. I did everything from karate to we would play hockey out in the street. We'd play football out there. I played baseball organizationally wise, basketball, tennis, things like that. So I did lots of change of directions, multi-sport athlete, all the way up until I was, again, that freshman doing wrestling. And so I think from a conditioning standpoint, it was the fact that, one, I did everything under the sun. My parents never told me no. The only thing they told me was if I started something, I had to finish it for that season.
Pause there for a minute. Was there, because for me, my parents were the same way. And there were some things I started that I didn't like at all. and I had to, like soccer, I had to finish.
Yep.
After like 1 week, I'm like, this is horrible. This is terrible.
Yep.
Then it's like, nine more weeks.
Soccer, I made it from like 5 through about 10, I think. So I made it a while, but once it actually got to where kids started to grow faster than I did, and I was still staying small, I was kind of like, I don't like this. I didn't like all the running. I found basketball, and I like basketball because I feel like the running didn't feel like it was long stretches. You can kind of walk and change of direction. I was big into the NBA. I was a big Jordan kid. So, that kind of drove me that direction and got away from soccer. But then I also tried baseball and
Were there
tennis.
any that you tried that you knew right away, like within 2 weeks, like, no, this is not good, but then you're stuck for at least that season?
The tennis was like that, and, but oddly enough, I finished it all through middle school because, again, I was on varsity. But when I started playing, I didn't really like it.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't really have any friends that played it. It was one of those things where, like, everybody else is playing football and I'm playing tennis.
Yeah.
And, and then like, well, that's really weird. And it was like, well, I'm kind of good at it. I don't know why I was, but maybe it's because I had some baseball and soccer and the change of direction stuff. I could just hunt a ball down pretty well. Just a matter of being able to hit it well.
It's weird. As I'm asking this question, I'm thinking back to my own, and because I played soccer still for like 4 years after that, and I didn't like it. And then it sounds like you were the same way. Like you're in the sport you don't like, but yet we still did it for years.
Yep.
What the fuck was wrong with it?
Well, I mean, I'm thinking 6th to 8th grade, like you're a really young boy, you're starting to mature, you're kind of curious of what your peers think about you. So it's kind of like, well, if I'm not doing a sport, am I going to be able to get any girls? Am I going to be popular? Anything like that. And then for whatever, and also the teacher at the time, or the teacher that coached it, was the math teacher, and I was really good at math, and I had him for math all 3 years. And so that was another thing. Was like, I kind of almost felt like I was appeasing him. As I really like him as a math teacher. Why am I not going to go spend the rest of my day with him after school and hit some tennis balls and have fun with my friends? So,
for myself, I started to dwindle down. I think when I got into junior high, because
that's how mine was. Yeah.
Because now it becomes like real.
Yeah.
It's funny.
That's
right?
when I focused. It was basketball and tennis for like the two things in middle school, and then I gave up baseball at the end of 6th grade. I started focusing on those two, and then I found wrestling, and I had just the one.
All right. Now, what about your background? With sports?
So my family actually grew up, I was pretty poor, so I actually wasn't allowed to do any sports until I was in junior high, till my parents felt like we would take it like seriously. But so I spent my time climbing trees, jumping over the creek, building forts, stuff like that. So I was doing stuff, and I started playing volleyball. And then if you're around a bunch of high school girls for any amount of time, there's a lot of drama. And after 4 years, I started in 7th grade. After 4 years, I was like, this is too much drama for me. I'm done. And I did track, and I was awful at it, but I loved it. I did hurdles, and I was terrible, but it was a lot of fun.
So what pulled you into the exercise science realm then?
So I wasn't always outside playing all the time, but I was actually a pretty chubby kid. And it was a weird summer day. My dad was like, all of us kids, we're gonna go run a mile. And being a chubby little kid, I was like, I can't run a mile. And I think it was about 7th grade, and I did it. I ran the whole way, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I think I can do more than what I think I can. And then so I actually started running, and my dad had like a bench and some weights, and I lifted weights from what I got from magazines, stuff like that. And I lost like 25 pounds or something like that. And my athletic ability was a lot better. I still wasn't super great. But I was like, dang, I can actually play sports and do stuff. And in high school, I was okay at sports. But then just the way that I felt, how my confidence was better, that's what I wanted to help other people do. So while I met Brandon and my degree was in exercise science, I really wanted to do personal training. So I'm very passionate about general population clients. Like, it's my favorite when a client comes to me and said that they played with their grandkid for 30 minutes and they had never been able to do that before, like without getting out of breath. That's what really gets me going. I'm like, that's so awesome. I love that. So that's where I started into exercise science. I was like, I want to help people see their potential.
What if we didn't run that mile? What if he didn't force you to do that?
I didn't want to.
Obviously.
It was a hot day, and
Yeah.
I was like, Dad, like, no, I don't know.
Well, go back to when you were doing it. How many times did you want to quit while you were doing it? Or was it like,
Honestly, I just remember the end. Like, I just remember finishing and just being so proud of myself. And we actually jumped in the river afterwards and cooled off and went for a swim. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where I'd be.
well, I put that out there because I think for all of us, there's pivotal points, you
Yeah.
know, when we're younger.
Yeah.
It's like, shit, I didn't know I could do that. Did I just do that? I did that, you know? Then
Yeah.
those are always great to look back on, right? Because there's usually somebody that helped you, helped you,
Yeah.
pushed you to be able to do that. And, you know, I'm no Freud of weightlifting or anything like that, but I think that's a lot of the reason why we end up doing what we do later.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why you get in the industry, because maybe you think of the girl before you did that.
Yeah.
Like, what if you could be that person that you finished this thing, and then after this thing, you're like, holy shit, I'm better than I thought I was.
Yeah.
You know, that's a key, you know, key moment. I think it's when you're in the industry that you guys are in, you know, you put yourself in a position to be in those moments without even knowing that you're
Yeah.
actually doing
Oh yeah,
it.
for sure.
I wouldn't have. I think that's one of the things that I'm attracted to about Brandon is he makes me do things all the time that's out of my comfort zone. Like being here right now, he asked me to come. But like even just opening a gym, like I had just graduated school and like I had maybe a year of experience under my belt, and I'm like, why would anybody want to hire me? Why would anybody want to do that? And Brandon's like, we're doing this.
Yeah. Well, I want to get to that because at some point in time you have this in your head, and then you have to pull the trigger. There's
Yep.
two different things. You know, those are two vastly different things.
Yes, very.
Like everybody has it in their head, but then it's like, okay, you know, how did you know when it was? I'm sure it was later than what you would have really wanted. How did you know when I have to do this now?
So the current space that we're in, the co-owner of that space, his son trained with me in the garage for a couple years, and he was one of my training partners. I could always rely on him to show up to help me, even though he had no aspirations of competing. He's like, I just want to lift weights. The place I go to is terrible and it sucks. You know what you're talking about. I would much rather train with somebody that knows what they're talking about, learn something from you, and just have a good atmosphere. And in return, you know, I'll help spot you and do whatever it is you need to do. Well, he got a hold of me one day and he's like, hey, we're moving out of this building. We're taking our stuff out. We're going to have this vacancy available. And he's like, I know this is something you've always wanted to do. Would you be interested in renting it out? We've never rented it before, so we've got some stuff we got to do. But would you be interested in come looking at it? And I was like, well, I guess. I mean, why wouldn't I? I at least got to look at it. And I walked in, and I mean, it's 7,000 square feet. And I was like, holy crap, this is huge. I don't need something this big.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, yeah, but he's like, it's honestly really cheap. We're not going to rent it for hardly anything. We honestly just don't want to lose money on the building. We've already got a 10 on the other side, so we're already in the green. We really just want to have somebody in here so we don't have to pay for the gas and whatever. So I was like, all right, well, you know, let me know when it's all done and then what rent's going to be. And then he called me, and whenever he told us the rent value, I was with her at the time, and I was like, we got to do this. The price per foot that they're asking us is ungodly cheap for what it should be. Now, you know, it's a triple net lease, so there are some expenses that I know now that I didn't really know then, but it's a good thing because I was an idiot. And I wouldn't have probably pulled the trigger like, well, now I got to factor in all my liability and all this other stuff, that those numbers start going up. But initially, I just saw that price, and I was like, and they also gave us the option of only having a year and being able to get out skate-free. The guy had started his own business, and he knew what that was like. And he's like, I don't want you to feel like you're locked into some 7-year lease that you can't get out of and your life is over. So he's like, I'll give you an option after your year one to get out completely skate free. And so I was like, this is it. This is what we got to do. We're not gonna find anything better. So then that's where we're still at.
What he doesn't mention though is that was like a month before our wedding.
Yeah. So they came to us with the paperwork literally in April of 2018, and we got married in June of 2018.
Yeah.
So
but that's kind of business, though. You learned that, right?
Yes, it is.
Nothing-
Happens at the least opportune time.
Yeah, great things happen, but they're always at the least.
Yes. Yep.
Yes.
And it was one of those things where, like, once we signed it, it was like, got Matt Goodwood on the phone. Hey, here's what we need from a equipment perspective.
Yeah.
I had to start talking to my buddies. Hey, we got to get all this stuff that's in my garage into the gym. We've got to make several trips to get stuff going. I had to start figuring out. I had my point of sale system stuff already figured out that I wanted to do. Like she said, I had some of that stuff already planned. But now, like I said, now I got to put into action. And it was overdrive of getting ready for a wedding and then trying to get a business up and going. And
now, had you been saving for this for years beforehand?
Yeah, so I had some money saved away, but obviously I had a lot of the equipment in my garage from that.
Yeah.
And then what I also did as well, because I had so much stuff, I literally just opened a new credit card, took whatever it was, maxed it out with there was 0% APR for 18 months, and I was like, you know what? In a year I'm out. So, worst case scenario, I still got money to pay this off with. And it wasn't, and I wrote an article, it was eventually on my training log, but now I think it's actually turned over to an article how I started the gym with less than 20 grand. And that's how that 20 grand happened, was I had some saved and some of it was at a $10,000 limit on my credit card. And that's how it happened.
Mm-hmm. And then what are you thinking during this whole time? Right. Cause you're about ready to get married and you're thinking, oh great, now we're going to be in debt.
Well, I don't even think I put that much thought into it. I trusted Brandon, and I was planning for a wedding. Like I'd always dreamt about my wedding since I was a little girl. So I'm like, I know what I want. So I pretty much was pretty consumed with trying to plan that. And so Brandon's over here he's like, can we do this? I need you to sign here. And I'm like, fine, here we go. Let's go. I don't think the reality really hit me until we actually opened.
Yeah.
And then we were both working jobs. So like I would go to the gym in the morning and then go to my other job at night. And then Brandon would be at his morning job.
I picked up a full-time warehouse job to make sure that I think when I talk to new business owners and they say, what should I do? I say, account for 6 months, you should have enough way to get by that if not a single person walks in your door, you're still open. Mm-hmm. Because the chances that happen are pretty much zero if you're not an idiot. So you just still got to, because if you probably are doing it too. You probably have some clientele, you probably have some friends, some family, some way to get people in the door to start spreading the word. So that's the way I planned, is I got to have 6 months of nobody walks in the door. And so I took that full-time job, was that, hey, any penny that the gym makes is going towards the gym, not towards me. I can still make, I still was working with people online, and I picked up that full-time job to be able to bolster our lifestyle so that worst case scenario, we can try to meet that 1 year deadline. Because after a year, I was thinking, we're going to have clients. We're going to have people in there training. And I already knew people that had already been begging for me to open a gym anyways, because they knew I trained in the garage. And they're like, I want to train your garage. And I'm like, if you can't train on Saturday or Sunday, you're probably not going to be able to, because I'm not just going to let you walk in and do your own thing.
Yeah.
So they already knew the equipment and the knowledge that I had, just the fact that it wasn't accessible.
Now you opened in 2017, is that right?
2018.
2018, so almost 5 years.
Yeah.
No,
Four and a half,
four and a half years. Well, you got through the first year, right? 90% of all businesses fail in the first year.
Yep.
Right, so that's the first hurdle. The second hurdle's 3. So you've already surpassed that.
Yep.
Right, not saying that it's easy, right?
Definitely not. Definitely
so
not.
you open the doors, and I had the owners of Heavy Metal Fitness Gym in Texas, right? So they weren't as prepared as what you were, right? So I mean, they opened the doors and just thought people were going to walk in and sign up, right? Because it doesn't happen like that. So what was your plan of attack after you opened the doors, just from a marketing side?
So everyone I feel like knows me as a powerlifter, so they don't really know my sports performance background, and that's what I was after. So that's when I drew up the model, was my area has, in terms of sports performance strength and conditioning, one, it's usually, before we got there, it was at least 10 years behind, at least. I mean, it was so far behind. The stuff that people were doing was just so outdated, and I was like, I know so much stuff that I can bring to the table, and I was one of these local kids that knew nothing about training. Nobody helped me in the weight room. Nobody taught me anything. I know how much faster and better our area can be if somebody can teach these kids how to do it. And at the high school level, it was just lifting weights and PE. There was no there's still not really any structured strength and conditioning where I'm at. So I was like, there's a big gap that can be filled, and the couple people that are doing it, honestly, we're just going to do it to do it. It wasn't one of the places attached to the hospital, so they're going to stay afloat no matter what because the hospital is funding it. It's not about whether the athlete's coming or not. So it's like the coaches aren't as passionate. We're obviously going to be passionate because it's our own blood, sweat, and tears and time in it. So we want the athletes to be better, and that's what I wanted to see, the athletes to have opportunities that I didn't have. And so that was kind of my marketing thing, was that we're going to have real training. Kids are going to actually learn how to train. It's not going to be any low-level stuff. The kids are going to learn to squat, bench, and deadlift as appropriately. And then it was and now that we've kind of grown, we've shifted it more towards improving movement and sport-specific movement. And I don't really like that word, but that's the best way I can describe it, because a back squat may not be the best thing for a kid to help them get better, especially if they're like 12 or something like that. So that was how we kind of marketed it, was that, one, it's safe. That's how we marketed it towards mom. Or towards dad, he's going to run, jump, be better, and they're going to be a better athlete. And then by default, they're going to get more opportunities available for them, especially at the high school level when they get older.
How hard was it for you to pivot around the stereotype of the powerlifting, though?
We still get that problem.
Yeah.
For sure. People like, oh, this is a powerlifting gym. And I'm like, no. I was like, honestly, I could dump every single powerlifter in my gym and my gym would still be open.
But we won't. We don't want to do that.
Yeah, I don't want to do that yet. To my lifters, I don't want to do that to you. I love you guys. But
No, but that's kind of your background, though, too.
Right.
So I think that's important to kind of stay around.
Right.
Because it's, as a coach, and you're working with these athletes, and you're finding out the things that you're finding out. Like the 12-year-old may not have to back squat, right? I did not just say that. Squat. Yeah. Right? I don't like the whole back squat thing, right? But when I'm talking to other coaches, I default to language that they, it kind of falls in there, even though I hate saying back squat because it's stupid. But you can kind of lose that, you know what I'm saying? If you get too far removed from that big strength base, which is a big part of your philosophy, which we'll get into that. It gets weird. Like, because even when you start to realize, man, that 12-year-old may not do that, in your head, you're kind of like, dude, did I just say that?
Yeah.
Like, no, I didn't just say that. I'm like, no, I did just say that, and it's probably right. Yeah. And so it's important to have in there with you guys building it through the first 3 years, right? It's 4 years, but I look at businesses as 1, 3, 5, 10. They're big hurdles that are in there. You're married as well, which, my wife owns 60% of this company. There's a whole different dynamic there. So I don't want to say what has the adversities and struggles been business-wise. What I will ask is, if there's other people that are married in business together, what advice would you have for them to be able to make it work?
I'll let you go first. You can get her on this way more probably than me.
Yeah.
I mean, it really depends on the person. If you really have to be best friends before you even start. And it helped Brandon and I. Obviously, we both want to train people. Before I even knew who Brandon was, I wanted to train people. So we have that passion in common. So decisions that we make are made to enable us to do that better. Yeah, it's a pretty pretty loaded question.
I would say too that while we're good friends as a married couple, we also have things that we are complete opposites on. And so that meshes really well because we're not always doing the same stuff. Like, she was literally just talking to Sheena about music, and like, honestly, like, I listen to music, but I don't play the piano. So like, you have fun talking to Sheena, I'm out on this conversation. Yeah. Like, I have nothing to contribute. So we each have our own things that we like. So I think that gives us the ability to step away and do other stuff when we want to do that, to where we don't have to be together, but obviously we want stuff together. But I think having that, where if we were identical of each other, we're not filling each other's gaps that we don't have.
Well, then you're in each other's face too much too.
Yeah.
I mean, at home and at work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you define separate roles? Like, this is what you do. This is kind of your department. This is what you do. That's your department, and stay out of each other's lane. Obviously, it's going to cross.
I would say that. I would say I take the business responsibilities when it comes to anything legally, paperwork, all of that kind of stuff. The stuff that people don't see, I've got 95% of that probably in my pocket. And I would say, like, you take care of 90% plus of all of our social media stuff. So there definitely are some defined roles for sure that she's definitely better at, that I'm better at, and we acknowledge that when we went to premarital counseling to make sure that this is what we wanted to do when we got married. We made good defined decisions then when it came to that. We kind of stick to those with our life, but our business kind of runs that way too.
And I was gonna add just one more thing, like, not to be too taboo, but communication is so big. If you have a problem, you have to talk about it. If something happens and it bothers me or something, I have to sit down and be like, Brandon, I was talking to this parent and I feel like maybe it didn't go well, or they treated me a certain way, or just anything. We have to sit down and talk about it. Don't just assume they know what's going on or how you feel about something.
Yeah, the communication's hard because, I mean, obviously if we're not on the same page, that hurts a little bit, but also when we're together at the gym, you know, something could have maybe not agreed at home, but we got to get together at work. I mean, we're working together. People are going to know whether we've had not a good conversation or not.
Well, that's the reality.
So
that's the reality. That's real.
Yep.
You
So
know,
that's the way the communication is. Like, I can still be disappointed in whatever happened in our personal lives, but guess what? Like, I still love you. We're still employees together. Let's just put that aside. We can talk about it later tonight and still work hard tonight together, coach together, be our normal selves. And, you know, we can come back to that conversation and still be professional. We don't have to hold it over each other's head all day at work or something like that.
I just might not talk to you all day.
Yeah.
Or for a week.
You do your own thing with coaching. I'll do mine.
Yeah. But I think that's it's a necessary thing in business, right? Because when you're a coach, right? So
Yes.
you've been a coach, then even with Purdue Barbell, you know, you were a coach there, then you're a trainer, and you're in these positions of authority,
Correct,
I guess is the way to define that. And when it's a decade of being in positions of authority over a period of time, there's not a whole lot of people that are going to call you out on your bullshit.
Right. Yeah.
Actually, many times there's nobody.
Yep.
Right now,
Sure.
that's where I'm saying these. While it's uncomfortable and you're fighting, pissed off, or whatever it is, but it's somebody calling you out on your bullshit, which you have to have because we're not always right.
Right. Yep.
You know, and it's enough that, yeah, it sucks. I mean, my wife won't talk to me for a week. You know, but while that's kind of going on, and maybe it's just a strategy that wives have sometimes, it makes you sit there and think, you know, like, maybe that, then you're like, fuck, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I'm not, you know.
Yeah.
But it's basically it's calling you out on your bullshit. Now, if that's not there, what happens a lot of times is ego.
Right.
Bigger and bigger
Yep,
and bigger and bigger and bigger. Now your training program sucks. You're a shitty coach. You know, all these other things just get blasted to where you lose that reality. And I see that a lot with business owners that don't have that, you know, that
They've got too many enablers in their life that just think they're doing good and they are good, but they don't have that one person to kind of.
I don't know if they're enablers like yes men.
Yeah, yes men would be better. Yeah.
Because at least an enabler is going to have some degree of realism in there.
Yeah.
Where it's been, I mean, you can see it. I see it with coaches a lot.
Yes.
You know, big time with coaches in all realms. And it's like, dude, like, where is your, you know, like a head coach has offensive, defense. Like,
right. Yep.
Where's your person that's saying, you know what, you might be wrong right now. Like, oh fuck, I would never tell Brandon. Like your trainers, right? Like I would never tell him that he's wrong. You tell him that he's wrong. I'm not telling him that he's wrong. Well, somebody needs to, you know, because even if you are right, which you probably are, right? You have to justify it. You see what I'm saying? So if somebody asks, if it's one of your trainers that they ask, then you're like, your answer just can't be cause.
Yeah, you can't.
Well, unless they're asking you why you're training a client, you know, then it's like, because.
We'll talk about later. Yeah.
That kind of thing. With the training background, I mean, you have the wrestling, so you kind of already felt a little bit how the strength and conditioning pulls into the sports. You were studying that as well.
Right.
You also, through your education and training, ran across. I forget now how you got associated with Louie. So how did that first happen?
Me and Adrian just talked about that recently.
I asked him the same question last night.
I used to know this answer.
So through a long run, it came through Jen Petrosino. But Jen knew Josh Conley, and I guess Josh reached out to Jen and said, "Hey, I think we're looking for some lighter guys." At the time, Westside was, I think it was like basically every guy in there was 198 plus. There was nobody. There might have been a 181, but 165 and under, there was nobody. And I think he had reached out to her knowing that she was light. She was through Elite FTS, thought she might have some connections of some people, and she put my name out there, and that eventually got me in touch with Josh. And then Josh gave my information to Louie, and then Louie called me while I was in grad school at Indiana State and saying, "Hey, I want to bring you out here for a dynamic day, put you up in the hotel, and we'll, train and talk shop and whatnot." And that's kind of how I got into Louie. He was kind of basically recruiting me to train there. But at the time, I was in grad school, and that was the hard conversation I had with Louie was, my school's paid for, man.
No, I remember talking to you at that time as well.
Yeah, that was a hard, a lot of people looking at me like, "Man, you are not into the sport. If you just passed up on Louie Simmons, what are you doing?" Yeah. But to me, while I was entrenched in powerlifting, competing, and I loved it, I was trying to think long ball. Unfortunately, I'm not going to meets and winning 30 grand. I'm thinking about how can I get my training facility off, and while passing up on Louie was a big thing, I'm still going to Westside. I'm still learning from Louie. Yeah. I can still pick up the phone call and say, "Hey, Louie, can I come talk to you?" I ran into him at meet several years later. Literally, he sat down next to me, and it was like nothing had changed.
Yeah.
Like, he remembered who I was. He remembered me. He instructed me how to use the reverse hyper to help me with some of the low back issues that I had then. Like, it just, that was the one thing that I liked about him, and that's how I got associated with him, and then obviously got associated with you guys.
Yeah. That was, I call that the weird trip, because I've had that conversation with probably dozens, I would say probably close to 50 people now, over the years, that they'll travel there and they'll be like, "Man, I need to, they'll go there, then they'll come see me." And it's just because it's on the way back and forth, right? It's just kind of how it is. So they'll be like, "Yeah, I was just over there and I was talking to and this is what it was." And I'm like, "Well, what do you want to do?" So it's like they go from this conversation where I think like by the time they leave there to get to my location, they're almost convinced they're going to do it. Like they're trying to, no, they're not convinced they're going to do it. They're trying to figure out how they could do it.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
was like, how can I finish grad school and still be at Westside? That's
like how they could do that. And then I call like the realistic talk. Like, and then they have the other 2 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, or wherever they're going to go. And I'll never tell them not to do it. It's just like, what's the benefit of doing it compared to what your long-term plan's going to be? And can you still do what you want to do in the sport without, kind of doing that? Then they go ahead and make their own mind. But it's sometimes I wonder if there wasn't that pit stop, what would happen, right? Because and I feel bad sometimes, like, man, maybe if they didn't do that, maybe they would have figured out how they could have done it and kind of gone. But it's all in hindsight. But where I'm trying to go here is when you're in school and when you're coming up through, I shouldn't assume, when you're coming up through training, conjugate's not going to be something that you're going to run into.
Yeah, right.
Right. You find all these other linear models first. Then maybe today it's different than it was, 20 years ago. Then you'll kind of run into conjugate, and it kind of is different than everything else. And it takes, and I remember having this conversation with you as well, it takes a deep dive into conjugate and concurrent training and all this to try to start to figure how do I want to say that? This misuse of terms.
Yes.
To be able to tie it all together to understand that it's concurrent. When did you begin to piece together that a concurrent / block, just for people that, God, now I'm assuming people know what we're talking about, right? Simplify it, right? Because you have to explain this to kids.
Yep.
So simplify just a concurrent or a block model compared to more of a linear model.
So the concurrent model is training multiple I like to say modalities in a microcycle. Your microcycle
Dude,
can
like
be
a fourth grader.
okay. So it'd be doing multiple qualities within a very short period amount of time, all encompassing. So whatever it is that you need to address, your sports might dictate that, or your goals might dictate like that. But basically, being able to do something fast, something heavy, something for reps from the conjugate piece that needs to be trained all entirely in that week, give or take. We'll just say a week. And then we even do it with our athletes. We do it in a given session. So, I mean, there's everything on the force velocity curve, things that are really fast, things that are really slow, and everything in between. So that would be how I would describe the concurrent model. You're basically working all of that in a very short period amount of time. So it's getting stimulated continuously every time that you're training, whether that be a week or a couple times a week or whatever it is.
With your own training, when did you migrate into that for your own powerlifting?
The first time I want to say I was at Purdue is when I started to get into the conjugate system and playing around with stuff myself, to when I honestly feel like I had a grasp on it was probably more of like 14. I'm going to say probably in 2014 going into 2015. So this would have been, took me almost 5 years of playing around with it.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is all coaches and everybody that's been around training for decade, 2 decades, ends up with some kind of philosophy, right? And that philosophy should have some kind of root base to it.
Yes.
Right? And there's different root bases that people can have. And first issue is I think people don't develop a root base.
I would agree.
Right? Coaches in particular.
Yes. Yep.
Right? Because then it's like, well, we're going to do the Ohio State program. Then we're going to do the Purdue program. Then they jump all over the place. When you have that root base, it becomes easier to start to regulate the variables for the population that you have. So your root base is, would you say it would be, this is going to be where some people said, would you say it's more block than it is conjugate?
I would say yes. My home base would probably be block, looking back at how I started training and how I learned about training, and even still how I train athletes and stuff today. There's still blocks and phases and everything that I do.
Yeah, and I think there should be.
Yes.
I really do. I think it's weird now because you've been following the conjugate stuff for a long time.
Yes.
There's 100, 200 different types of conjugate, which makes sense if it's coupling, right? The word means to couple, so it makes sense. But it's kind of messed up because if you're having a conversation with somebody, you're trying to figure out, like, okay, is this like West Side Book of Methods? Is this like Nate? Is this like winning? Like, where are you on this spectrum here? So I know exactly how you're defining terms.
Right. So I would say, first, I guess if we're talking about powerlifting, I would say that I am more, I'm trying to think, I would say I'm more probably towards Matt winning if I had to drift towards one notable name from a powerlifting. Now, from a sports perspective, definitely Nate Harvey.
Yeah.
That would definitely drift towards him. So it would depend on the population that we're speaking about.
Yeah. Well, I think anybody who's interested in conjugates should read your stuff, should read all theirs.
Yes.
Right? And then try to figure out first the similarities, because there's going to be more similarities than differences, and then why the differences.
Right.
And I think for a lot of the questions that I saw that people wanted us to talk about, that's their answer right there.
Yes.
Like, figure out the similarities first. Usually it's going to be in the squat wave or lower body wave. Figure that out first, and then look for what the nuance and the differences are. Where it gets, where I think that you can give a lot of insight is what most people look at is high beginner, low intermediate level, which would be most of the people who are online looking for training information. And so if I was to define that, I'd say somebody that's been training consistently for over 3 to 4 years. They're serious about their training. They're serious for them. Like, to them, it's a priority. Now, to other people that would look at it and they'd be like, dude, you got a ways to go, to kind of button stuff up. That's easy to find, that kind of stuff. You're dealing with kids that are under that.
Yes.
Okay. So
by a long shot.
By a big long shot, So with them, are you using the same model for your programming, or is it more gym class model?
It's almost a mix between. I would say, if I had to say one person or two people that have had more influence on the way I write training programs for youth athletes or athletes in general, would be Eric Cressey and Mike Robertson.
Okay, why?
Eric Cressey, I mean, from an athlete perspective, the dude churns out and works with more baseball players than anybody in a month, probably most people do in a year. I mean, you look at the off season, they're all at Cressey's. The people that genuinely want to stay in the MLB for a long time. So I keep up with a lot of his stuff because he seems to be on the fringe and the forefront of what rotational and overhead athletes need. And that's a big population that we work with. We work with a lot of overhead and rotational athletes.
Define those.
So rotational would be baseball, softball, and I even personally put swimming in there, just the way how cyclical they rotate. It's not necessarily the rotating like this, like you're doing baseball, but their body is rotating as they do swim. And then also volleyball would also be in that, tennis. Those also fall into that as well. So anybody that's got their arm overhead for usually a prolonged period of time or quite a bit during their sport, football would not be obviously an overhead sport. So those are the athletes that we work with a lot. And then Mike Robertson, more so from the corrective and movement piece, because when we work with a lot of athletes, the number one thing parents come to is, my kid doesn't move well, they don't cut well, they don't change direction well. That's usually a movement thing, and most people think, oh, well, they just need to get stronger. Well, we work with some strong kids that move like crap. I mean, they can't touch their toes, they can't sit down without low back pain, they're got shoulder issues or low back issues, and we're talking about 15, 16 years old. Like, you don't want to back squat that kid if that's what's going on. There, I use the word back squat, but if you don't, just people know that I'm talking about putting a barbell on their back, that may not be the best answer. Mike's ahead of the game when it comes to that. So I've been doing a mentorship with him for probably a year and a half now. And he's really helped change the way that we think about our programming and getting kids to move better. And then when they move better, because they're already strong, they kick people's butt because they can get to the positions they need to that they couldn't get into when it comes to shifting sideways or rotating. So those are the two people from the way that we model our training in terms of how they work with their athletes and what.
Kind of exposing my ignorance, right? Because I'm sitting here right now thinking in my head, like, how does a 12-year-old, 14-year-old have low back problems?
I know.
Idea.
It's mind-boggling. I mean, there was a 12-year-old girl, maybe she's 13, dealing with right low back pain, and her chiropractor says she has uneven hips, and you look at her, she doesn't have a hip hike. She's literally so rotated towards one side that one hip is having to hike for her to access her internal rotation because she doesn't have any of it. So if we can give her internal rotation, her hip drops and she moves better and feels better.
Now, can you do that within, what is it, 3 sessions per week?
So usually when they're in middle school, we usually advise starting out at once to twice, depending on how busy and what they got going on. We usually push for the 2. There are some kids, though, where I don't know how their parents keep their schedule straight, where getting them 1 time a week is prying at them.
And you can make a difference at 1 time a week for whatever the session is.
Yeah, merely because of the way we're choosing how to load kids and the positions that we're putting them in with the exercises. So people think, oh, you need to be squatting and benching and whatever. That's just going to exacerbate the problem that this person might have. I'm not going to bench press a 12-year-old, but so that's how we kind of look at stuff. How can we restore that motion a little bit, and then how can we load it and slowly work that load up, and then as you improve the movement with load, then it sticks and cements, and then they're not having the issues that they're having anymore, or maybe they're getting into a cut a little bit better, or they're getting out of that cut a little better.
When these kids come in, how do you assess them?
So we use, it's kind of a hybrid. So we use FMS to some extent. It's not FMS to the T, but we do like an overhead squat assessment. We do the hurdle step, the active leg raise, some stuff like that. Then we use, this is some stuff that, again, got from Mike and Bill Hartman. We measure hip and shoulder internal and external rotation, and then we do an Ober's test, and we do a Thomas test. That was to look at their hips, their low back, and all that kind of stuff. And then we also look at their ISAs. I think Danny's Overcash is La Martinez, name change, has talked about some of that stuff as well. So we use that to help determine what biases they should be seeing. And if they're not seeing those and they're seeing more, then we know that we need to dig deeper of why they're having more issues than what they should be. So it gives us, for an example, some kids do better. You probably know. If you're doing abdominal work, you probably feel your abs better when you're on your back than when you're on your belly. Why is that? Well, because of the way that your rib cages function and the way that your body's going to adapt to that, so I know where I can put kids on their back or on their belly to immediately get them to get the exercise faster. It puts me 4 steps ahead, or talking about sessions, 4 sessions ahead of the other trainer. So that's why I'm a month ahead, because I started where I needed to start, and they're trying to figure out where to start.
When does this happen? Does it happen after immediately after they sign up? I mean, what's the process?
So we either through email, phone call. Usually now we've got to establish rapport. People know that we've got this initial assessment consult. It's got to be done before your kid trains with us. So they call, hey, we want to schedule this. We figure out the best day and time that works for our schedule. Usually if it's a younger female, I try to drift them more towards her. There's a little more buy-in, a little more comfortable atmosphere. I usually get more of the head scratchers or the kid that's like really messed up or something crazy going on. I try to take some of those more advanced ones. And then after they have that, then that's when we sit down after we talk to mom and dad, what their goals are, what we saw. Then we write the training program. The kid schedules through the app, and then we see them as they schedule.
Okay. The reason I throw that out there is because when I used to train people, I tried to avoid any of the testing because, granted, it's Gen Pop, it's different population, right? So I didn't want them to come in when they already know that they're out of shape and not good, and then throw them with a bunch of data that shows them exactly how bad they suck. It's like, here's your body fat, here's this, here's this, and it's all bad. So I would use maybe 2 weeks of just very obviously, very, very basic stuff.
Yeah.
Because you don't know
Yeah.
outside of like blood pressure and shit like that, the big giant ones. You don't know. I was just trying to make them feel good for making the decision to come in.
Right.
Where if I could go back based on what you just said and have an intake process that they would know before they even walked in, this was part of the process, it would have been way better.
So we still do that with our personal training, but it's not like you're broken, here's what we're going to fix. It's more of like, we want to see you just do a squat. We want to see something that looks similar to a push-up. We want to see how your hamstring mobility is. We want to see how you step over something, how you do a split squat. It's not we're trying to make it hard. We just want to see where are we baseline starting, because there's some adults that they actually move pretty well. They've been active their whole lives. We can kind of nudge on them a little bit, where we get, some where it's literally like 2 exercises in, I'm already like, well, this is going to be the easiest training program to write, because this is just the person that just honestly needs to move foundationally well more than anything else.
Yeah.
And so that's her kind of baby. That's usually who she's writing training programs for, and usually who she does the assessments for. I do one every now and then, but usually that's what she does more of now than I do, where I dig down more into the complicated athlete side.
Yeah. Now, when they come in and they are what you just described, let's call that a GPP block. Right. The conditioning block. If they are not the once a week person, right? Because obviously that's going to slow the results a lot, right? So let's say they're the 2 to 3 times a week. It was rare, like a 2-time-a-week person. How long would they stay in that conditioning block, assuming that there's compliance, they're showing up? I mean, better question, how fast can you get them out of that really, really basic conditioning block to move them into something else?
I would say usually by the second block, it's starting to get pretty, I would say it's challenging for them. I would look on paper and be like, it's easy for me. So in that regard, I'd say once they've got 2 months in, they're usually pretty good to where we can kind of start loading up a little bit more training volume, working on workload and more work capacity stuff if that's on their table.
How long would a block be?
So we write our training blocks in 4-week installments.
Okay.
All our billing's done monthly, so that works really well from a
Okay.
logistical side.
Well, that's another interesting point to put in there too, because you got to figure out how to bill.
Yes.
Right. So now we're gonna bounce around a lot, because we're gonna go from the training thing into the business thing, because it's got to work together.
They do. Yeah.
Right. Because you don't want to spend, you don't want to write a quarter program, detail specific, for somebody that may only pay for a month and be gone.
Yeah, definitely not.
So
I learned that a long time ago.
Yeah. So how do you navigate that?
So we have an initial 3-month commitment. So that immediately tells us, one, whether this person is actually truly interested in making change. And then once they've done that 3 months, then there's a minor price break. The price goes down a little bit per month, and it's literally monthly from that point on. So if you want to quit after month 4 or month 5 or month 6, then there's no strings attached. But I think Alan Cosgrove would agree with me. If someone trains with you for 3 months, chances are them sticking around is probably pretty good if you do your job well.
Yeah.
So, and we found that to be the case as well, but also that gives us enough time to make sure we get that progressing. And I would say that usually about 2 months is probably a good time that we get that with a regular general population client. But that extra third month kind of starts to account for, well, if they miss a session here, they miss a session there, we can probably still get them results more cases than not. And then that's how, from a billing perspective, it bills them monthly. So there's an assessment fee that we have, but it's essentially free if they do the training, and that's the way that we explain it. Hey, you've got to pay this fee for the assessment. If your first day, your first month is going to have that assessment fee deducted because you're training with us. If you don't want to train with us, then that assessment fee makes sure that my staff did not waste their time, and I'm not losing money on the payroll side of it to set aside that hour to work with that client.
Now, are they groups or individuals?
It's all semi-private with kind of like what Alwyn does as well. So they've got individual training programs, but they're signing up for similar times. So usually we average probably anywhere between 4 and 6 clients per hour throughout the day. The morning is probably the slower piece, but there can be some that have 10 people in them at one time.
And how specific does that get? Is it the main movement can pretty much be the same for each person, but then just change
we're talking
based about...
when we talk about specificity for each person, like every single exercise on that training program is different from kid to kid to kid to kid to person to person. So, you might be doing your safety bar box squat on your program. Adrian might be doing a cambered bar squat, and then, I got a kid doing a heels elevated sandbag squat. And it's all on their training program, and it's all at the same time. But, and you might be on deadlift day, and they might be on squat day. It just depends on what day you come in.
With it being semi-private, how many people can you have going at one time to where yourself or your trainers can manage that effectively?
So the maximum that we have currently per hour is 10, and we make sure that there's 10. There's at minimum 2 coaches on the floor. We try to overstaff and go for 3. So you're looking usually around a 3-to-1 ratio. That's what our goal is, to try to keep it under.
Yeah.
But we allow it for up to 5. Because there are some busier times, busier hours, or if I need to step out or something like that, then they can still manage that group, and it's not going to hinder the results that we have. And I think that's the testament to that. The system that we use is that we teach our clients and our athletes how to train. Like after they've been there for, there's literally a girl that just came back from school, and we're doing her training for 6 weeks, and I gave her a new training program, and I was helping her yesterday morning, and she only needed help with like 4 exercises because I taught her how to train so well. I didn't have to teach her how to do a safety bar split squat. She knew what the safety bar was. She knew what the split squat was. She knew what was expected. I went over and helped her and pushed her, but I had 2 other personal training clients that I was also helping manage in that same time. So the nice thing is I can basically wander and help, but they obviously know if they need help, yell at me. I'm coming over there. I'm going to answer, show you how to do it, make sure it's right. And then so there's some self-accountability, and from an athlete side, we do that because we want them to understand if college sports is what you really want to do, you ain't getting that one-on-one handheld baby stuff. It's you and probably 40 other kids. So when you walk in there, one, you're going to be prepared, but you're also going to be not having that expectation of like, oh, my strength coach is ignoring me. Well, no, your strength coach has got to worry about 39 other kids. You're just one of them. And it keeps the cost down for the parents too. So if you're talking about one-on-one training, that might be up to $100 an hour.
Yeah.
Probably the quality of product that we deliver, like that's what I like to think that I would charge if I did one-on-one training. I would charge $100 an hour.
Yeah.
But I know in my area I can't get that. My people in our area can't charge $40 an hour.
Yeah.
So from a business perspective, one, I can get the kids in, but I can challenge that top dollar. But like, hey, you're still getting your individual training, but I'm actually teaching your kid how to train as well, even the 10-year-olds.
Yeah. How many of the clients that you have, how would you define the demographic breakdown? So what's the percentage of Gen Pop? What's the percentage of the group that we're talking about? And then the other percentage, if it even exists, the more advanced, not high intermediate.
What would you say? Probably 15 to 20% personal training Gen Pop. I would say then probably 70% then are the 10 to 16-year-olds, and then you got that extra 5, maybe 10% that are the senior that's going to go play D1, or we got a professional guy that comes in or something like that. Then that's very small.
Okay. I'm going to speak for you here for a second. So that top tier, that's the most challenging because you have to think more,
Yes.
right? So that's I don't want to say the most fun because they're all different for different reasons.
Right. Yeah.
But it's the one that if it was me personally, I'd be like, no, I want to figure that out. So if as you're in business longer, you will have people that you'll take from that bottom all the way
To the top.
you know, to that
no question.
top.
Yep.
What changes do you see in doing that? Like it's a tough question, right? Because you don't have that commitment for 4 years
Right.
to ride a quadrennial, right?
No.
You know, but how would you move somebody from that mid range to the top range in the sport training sector? Granted, they still have to do their sport skill,
yeah.
for which they have to excel at that to
Right.
be able to move up too.
So I would say we try to focus still on the fundamentals. We still make sure that they can squat bilaterally, squat single leg. They can still hinge bilaterally, hinge with single leg. They can push, pull in all directions very well. And then once they can get all that, then it's about, making sure that the running mechanics look relatively good if they have to run, or if they're a rotational athlete, they can access the rotation in the hips that they need to rotate it in. And if they can access all that stuff, then we can start getting more aggressive on how we load that and challenge that. So if we take a kid that's from 10 years old, for example, there's no direct barbell work at all, 0 for that population. So it's literally about, can we teach them body weight squats with a little bit of load? We'll use the box squats to make sure those look good. We teach them how to do push-ups well. They do inverted rows. They do some band pull-aparts, face pulls, planks, dead bugs, things like that. And then as they evolve, then those things become loaded. Then you start putting in some barbell work. Then you start getting a little more specific towards whatever their sport demands are. And then once they get to be that senior that's going to college or whatever, then you can kind of start pulling out your bag of tricks of, okay, maybe I'm going to try some triphasic stuff to get ready for the season. Or, I want to try to actually I want to implement some dynamic effort work because this kid actually understands how to create force. He's strong enough to create force now. Now I can put some bands on the barbell and give him rest intervals like regular dynamic effort work. Then you can kind of go to that. I would say that's how most of our training probably progresses, just like anything else. We start with the fundamentals, slowly load it, and modify it over time.
What's one example of how you would implement in the triphasic stuff for that?
So I did this for a baseball player. He's now playing in college. We did this for his senior year. Well, I first asked him first. I said, hey, I'm not going to make you do this. If you want to do it, we're going to do it. If you don't, then I'm going to kind of stick to my regular guns and just prepare you as I would almost any other baseball kid that's in high school. I might give you just a little bit more complicated weighted throws and things like that. And he's like, yeah, I'll try it. So we literally did the eccentric block and the concentric block, or in the isometric block and the concentric block. And it was
define those for those that don't know what you're talking
the eccentric
about.
would be like the lowering piece. So if you're looking at a squat, for example, going down, then we would only focus on that part of our main movements. That would be the goal, would be basically tissue tolerance. Then isometric would be holding it.
Well, with that, they still have to stand up, right?
Correct.
So how do you explain that to the kid before that set?
So when I did the squat, that's what I said. First of all, we did that with I'm trying what exercise we used. I want to say we did it with a front squat because we were far enough away. I said, hey, this needs to be light enough that you can still stand up with the weight. So, I know you can front squat XYZ. It needs to be less than that. 70 to 80% is what I want you kind of gunning for in terms of load. And then the load's going to increase over the course of the month. Start lower than heavier. It's easier to add weight as the month goes on versus you don't want to take weight off as the month goes.
Is there a tempo count on the eccentric?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So like through triphasic stuff, that's usually a 6 seconds. So that's what we use. We use 6 seconds, and we only did singles and doubles, and that's all we did. So,
all right, so that's the eccentric section,
Yep.
right? And then you move into
the isometric, which
and then how's that time-wise?
same thing, 6 seconds hold, and that's, if you ask anybody that's done any of the triphasic stuff that I've done, I make them do the 6 second isos, and they say they're brutal.
Now,
They
how
are
are
hard.
how are the isos though? Are you loading it through an eccentric, or are you just starting against pins? Give me an example.
So when we did the isometric for him for deadlift, we pulled against pins.
Okay. Any load on the bar at all before the pin?
Just a little bit. I think we did 50 or 60%.
Okay.
At the most. That was not. I told him it needed to have some weight, but it didn't need to be heavy. I was
Yeah.
care about. I wanted you. I think I told him I want you to rip the rack out of the ground.
Okay.
Like that's what you should be thinking.
And then week one is how many seconds?
6 seconds.
How
It's
many
6 seconds.
sets?
Oh, we started off with 3 sets of 1.
Okay, so 18 total seconds.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, all right.
And it was, around below the kneecap but above mid shin.
Okay.
And then that would, and then we would pair that with a loaded jump to actually jump through it.
Yeah.
So, and then there's a concentric part where you're actually just gonna explosively do it. That one for squats, we put the safety bar on the pins, and we did split squats because we were getting a little closer towards season. That was all split squat variants where we just stand up as strong as possible, and then paired that with a lateral jump.
Now, as that cycles through, does the movement plane stay the same?
Usually,
so
yes.
okay.
Yeah. So he was a 2-week kid. So his day 1 was usually a squat variant of it, and the day 2 was usually a hinge variant of it.
Okay.
And then there was one on the squat day. We would also do a push variant, but we didn't do any kind of bench pressing, so to speak. We would use like a landmine, or we did different like push-up variations. Like the isometric, he would have to hold the push-up position off the ground with the weight on his back for 6 seconds, and that was it.
All right. And you were changing the movement each time?
For every 4-week block, yes.
All right. Well, for each phase, like the first
Correct,
phase
yes,
is,
each phase,
so
yes,
each
correct,
phase
yeah.
is it a 3-week phase?
4.
A 4-week
Usually
phase?
I would want to do 3, but again, tied back to our billing problem.
Yes.
So it was 4 weeks because of that. So that's why I also had made that first week super light,
Yeah.
because I knew we needed to get by week 4. So you could almost call it your prep week of
Yeah.
the phase if you really want to.
Well, once you break out of that first movement, then does the triphasic stay in?
For some of
accessories.
the exercises, yes. It's very hard. So if you think about eccentric only, imagine how sore that kid's going to be.
Yeah.
So, like I would do it for chin-ups because he was a baseball athlete throwing. So we would do chin-up eccentric only. And then we did the push-up eccentric only. But those were the only piece. If it came to like his face pulls and some stuff like that, regular accessory work, I just kept the volume lower because I knew the eccentric stress that he was going through training at that time.
What metrics do you use to gauge if they're getting better?
We look at on those exercises like that, the bar load that he's able to move, and then by just watching them jump, if their plyometrics and power stuff is looking good, then it's pretty noticeable at that level. It's not like I do like a pre-test and a post-test after that, and some of that's also just feedback of how you're feeling. But also, he had his best season ever in high school. He had more home runs than anybody in the county. Pitched really well. I mean, he obviously got a full ride scholarship. Like it worked wonders for him in terms of his on-field performance, and to me that's what matters more than anything. Maybe you can throw the med ball 2 miles an hour faster, but at the end of the day, are you playing better? That to me matters more.
As powerlifters, we have the squat, bench, and deadlift that we use as the key metrics, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean we're training those movements, because you got max effort movements, dynamic, all these other movements. With your different groups, what would be your main metrics? Basically, what would be your squat, bench, and deadlift that you're using to track globally?
So we use the vertical jump, we use the broad jump, and then we use, depending upon what sport they play, we either use pro agility or 20-yard sprint. Those are our athletic tests.
Yeah.
And then obviously we still have them work up on a trap bar deadlift or a front squat every now and then, but that's not something that I'm like keeping track of over time. I just want to make sure that over the course I'm working with the athlete, the trends are continuing to go up. They may not need to be up all year round, but if the kid started off with this here and 6 months later, now they're front squatting 135 for 5 and not 75 for 5, all right, we're in a good spot, obviously. So I care more about the speed and agility piece and the plyometric piece more than I do the bar load, so to speak, for disposable.
Now, if it's Gen Pop, what metrics are you going to use if you're working mostly with the Gen Pop?
So we also do the FMS for the general population clients, but the biggest one for that is we don't take their weight. So like you were saying before, you don't want to make these people, you want to invite them in. You're not trying to do anything that's going to turn them away. So we don't usually do weights. We just do the movement wise, and theirs usually is by weight and how they are moving. So I've actually, with the sports performance kids, we have the numbers, and we've had a couple parents who are like, hey, I want to do these tests again just to see how they've improved, and so we can like prove it. We don't really have a way to do that with the general population, but whenever they lose weight and they feel better and they look better and they know that they can move better, we've never had a client come and ask us and be like, hey, I need to prove that I'm doing better or whatever it is. So we actually don't really have a great one for them. They
Yeah.
just they come in and they're like, hey, I was able to I had an older guy that said he was able to put his shingles over his shoulder
Yeah.
and climb up the ladder and help his son roof, and he was just ecstatic about it. And so that's what I kind of take as their metric.
Yeah. Tell me about a time with a Gen Pop, right? To where, because we'll get to this too. Business is brutal. I mean, if you're just gonna be honest, it's not all, great, right?
Yeah.
And there's some really brutal shit that's associated with it. But there's also things that are really, really awesome, right? So tell me about a time to where, one of your clients, one of those days where you went home and said, you know what, this shit's worth it.
Actually, for me, that really happens a lot of the times. I had just yesterday, we have an older, I say older, she's like early 50s, and she,
Yeah, thanks.
sorry, I always say she's not older. But she deadlifted, 79 kilos on the hex bar, and it looked awesome. And I was like, Tammy, do you know how much actual weight that is? And it was 175
Yeah, something like that.
pounds.
Yeah.
And
Okay, they
and
bar,
she
yeah.
was like, what? I was like, Tammy, that's a lot of weight. Like, that's awesome. And so she was excited about being able to. I feel like the kilos kind of throw people off, and then when you tell them how much they're actually doing, they're like, oh my gosh.
For that group, the kilos are probably good, though.
Yeah,
For sure.
Yeah.
Mess up their
it
head.
definitely is. And then we have another, she's in her early 60s, and it took us about a year for her to be convinced that she could lift heavy weight and not get bulky. And we were talking about it. She'd been with us for a year, and I was like, you've been using this 12 pounds. I know you can do 20. I know that you can. And so I was trying to convince her to do it, and she was talking about getting bulky. And Brandon goes, well, you've been here for a year. Are you bulky yet? And she honestly just kind of sat there for a second. And then now every time I see her, she comes and tells me how she's added 5 pounds onto this, or she'll be like, Adrian, I did 30 pounds the other day. And I think just that confidence boost that they see in themselves, we know that carries over into other parts of their life as well.
What about yourself?
I would say the big one is probably, she's older as well. She's probably late 50s.
That's not old. Not old.
Yeah.
I'm not late 50s
But
yet.
she's had a lot of
Almost mid.
she had a lot of hip and low back issues, and I actually started training her when I was at Indiana State. That's how she was one of the few that migrated over, and still work with her to this day. And she's had the most annoying hip, low back issues. She's still dealing with some, but her physical therapist was convinced that she just needed stronger hip external rotation work. She needed more glutes. And as much as I was helping her, he's like, you need to stop doing any strength and conditioning you're doing with them. Like, it's feeding your dysfunction. And I was like, so after I got her on the table, I did more assessment tests and everything I've learned. I was like, actually, your PT is actually wrong. Your external rotation is the things he's having you do is feeding your dysfunction, which is why going PT is not getting you better. You stop coming to us. That's why you're getting worse. I was like, give me a little bit of time. Let me tinker with your program. I'm going to go through this. Don't go to the PT for a little bit, because it got to the point where, like, from an insurance perspective, it's starting to get a headache. And I was like, don't worry about it. Keep coming in 2 times a week. I'm going to put in as much thought as I can to this. And now she's way better off than she was then. She can do some split squats here and there. She can do her squats almost to 90 degrees, even with a hip replacement. That's one of her issues that she's dealing with. And everyone's saying, you shouldn't do any kind of squats or anything like that. And it's definitely better. And it's like, to see something like that of like, and I'm not trying to knock any PTs, but you have somebody that what they seem to think that PT is like their holy grail. If this person says I can't do it, then I can't do it. And I'm like, training and knowledge has come so far that some people are still so far behind. And if you believe what they say, because everyone sees me as the meathead strength coach, what does he know about fixing this hip? Well, I'm doing my continuing education every single day of the past 10 years. this dude's still stuck on his degree from 20 years ago. I can guarantee you my knowledge is probably a little more advanced than what it was when he graduated.
That's a weird thing, though, because how do you navigate that conversation with the client?
Yeah, so obviously I've been working with her for a long time, and
Yeah.
I just said, I've got some ideas. I'm in this mentorship group. I'm gonna present everything I have on you, and I'm gonna just talk to them and say, hey, I want to make sure I'm on the right path, and they were. And I said, I'm gonna come back with some stuff. We're gonna work on it, and we'll just see if there's improvement.
Yeah.
You obviously got to give us a little bit of time, and I mean, probably within 2 or 3 months, I mean, her hip was considerably better. I mean, she can now do her sled drags, and she can do all of her split squats. They're not rock bottom deep, but she can do them without excruciating pain anymore. I mean, she's not doing any more glute bridges anymore because we're not going to feed that dysfunction. So she's like, it's better. So now she does think she has some neurological issues at this point, which I'm starting to agree with that part of it. I do think there's some neurological stuff that's way outside my scope. And I've told her that, and I was like, and she's got an appointment for that. So, but from a muscular perspective, she was being told to do one thing that was actually exacerbating what the actual underlying problem was.
Well, I think the way that you presented that is a very effective communication strategy, because most coaches, especially meathead coaches or whatever it's going to be, they're gonna tear the other person down and try to make themselves look better. And we all know that's the wrong thing to do, because it never works. But when you're able to say honestly, I need to put that out there because some people just bullshit. Look, I'm part of a mentor group, or I know these people that really, really know this. Let me do I have the permission, to run your case through them, and then see what they have to say. That in their mind's going to put you above, that other person, because that other person is not saying, hey, look, I'm going to go talk to your orthopedic, or I'm going to talk to this, or I'm going to talk to this. They're just saying straight out. So now you're not, because you can think of it as like a competition, like you're competing against this other person on this, but now you got this competing with the other person.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I got all these experts up here that are coming here, and this person, most of the time, in the scenarios that I've been like that, most of the time the only thing they fall back on is, I've been doing this for 30 years.
Yep. That was pretty much their trump card.
Yeah, I'm like you just said, what do you do outside of that?
Yeah.
Which is, I think, true with any profession. If all you do is your job, but you don't learn what's going on in the industry, or what, if you're not always feeding what you're doing, you fall behind. Not only do you fall behind, but you can't even have a conversation.
Yeah, not with your peers.
No, not with your peers, but not your clients either. Because if they come in and they say, hey, look, I just read about X, Y, and Z, but you don't even know what the hell that is, you're behind the ball. But sometimes you don't. And you can say, well, let me look into it. And then you look into it, and you're like, oh, that's just like a variation of this. And then you can have that conversation because you're staying up with it. I don't know how many people in some of those other fields that you're talking about even know what's going on right now.
Yeah.
At all, and none. And so that puts them behind, a lot.
Right.
So where, as a coach, where do you look for, because you only have so much time. Right. So, and you don't want to spend all your time on TikTok and Instagram Reels and crap like that, because it's an hour on there's an hour that you're not kind of keeping up with what's going on. How do you keep up with what's going on?
So, like I mentioned Mike Robertson's iFastU. For me, that's where I try to spend most of my time. That gets me access to him and Bill Hartman, and then other people that are in that group. And that has had the most. Danny's a good example of this. The model that she uses is basically the same model that we use. That all stemmed from Bill Hartman. And that's where training seems to be going in terms of if you want to truly make change. Now, if you want to squat, bench, deadlift, and whatever, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not knocking that. But for what we do for a living, we've got to be ahead of wherever other people are if we want to continue to get – it's almost a race of who can get the results the fastest. And that, to me, has been something very helpful. And we talked earlier about the anatomy and physiology part was something I liked. This is making me rethink everything that I've ever learned in school in terms of how movements work and what you're doing, there's way more physics, and the compression expansion just makes things very complicated, but my mind likes that. I like to be able to think about, well, I liked this exercise, but now I'm scratching my head that maybe I don't like this exercise as much as I thought, knowing what I know now. So what I would normally pick, maybe say a band pull apart, well, that's going to further feed this dysfunction. Maybe I need something that gets them out in front and maybe not out behind. And then that makes me reconsider my exercise selection, which then makes me change my programming, which then changes how the whole program eventually evolves. And I think the way that we've written training programs for 4.5 years at this business has definitely changed. And I know when we look back at old programs, we're like, I wrote that? What the heck? This sucks.
Yeah. Well,
I wouldn't give this to anybody.
The band pull apart's one example. What's another example of an exercise that you had to kind of go back and think about?
The Bulgarian split squat for sure.
How so?
Powerlifters love that for loading the legs. If you're somebody that's got an anterior orientation that continues to push you further and feed that dysfunction, chances are if you're a powerlifter, we just filmed a video with this with Sheena, the front foot elevated split squat's probably going to be your jam way more for helping keeping your low back relaxed, keeping your pelvis underneath you, and developing your lower body strength while still keeping your hips and everything happy. Again, nothing against wearing split squat, but we use that. That's almost like our trump card when we're in season. When I want to make a kid faster, I'm giving them that. But if the kid can't do a split squat worth a dang, I can give them a front foot elevated split squat, and it gets better, considerably better. Heels elevated squats are another thing that we use way more than I ever did. I understand that now. For a lot of kids that are super, super extended, it's something I can always fall back on. They're going to be able to hit 90 degrees. They're going to move better. They're going to be able to lift more weight. Not right now, but in the future because of that exercise where some kids, you watch some people squat, they just can't get to 90 degrees, and that's just the way that their body's built, and you just got to change some external factors for that. I would say that's another one.
A lot of front loaded.
Yeah, a lot of the double kettlebell or a kettlebell front racked position for a lot of athletes goes a long way for helping open up that upper back in case, especially if they're back here a lot, it gets that scapula to come around a little bit. We use that from a loading perspective a lot, and the nice thing is it's very challenging for a lot of kids. They can use some load, but it's not nearly what they think they can do, and then they get the free abdominal work on the other side.
What's a couple upper body exercises to go? Because there was 3 lower body you just ripped out.
The kettlebell arm bar, we filmed that one today. That's a great, I wouldn't say it's a mobility exercise, but it's almost like a movement exercise. You're not going to get stronger with it.
Describe it to me.
You're start on your back, you got the kettlebell out in front of you, and then you're going to roll to your side, open up your shoulder, take a deep breath, and then roll back.
Okay.
So you're getting some internal, external rotation, but you're also getting the stability piece. You're getting your body rolling on your side, which lets you breathe into your upper back a little bit more. That's from a rotational athlete perspective. We use that a lot in season to keep shoulders happy. And I've found for many of my power lifters, if you've got cranky elbows, if you give that a shot, it usually goes a long way because, one, you're getting that internal rotation, but then your scapula's got to stabilize. You're on your side. You're breathing into your back. Your scapula's allowed to move. Those are all things power lifters don't do anything for. And 2 to 3 sets of 5 on each side go a long way. I do them every day whenever I lift. And then we just filmed another one on the landmine press. That's more for bench press athletes, I would say. They don't use enough. Their serratus gets really weak, and then their shoulder gets cranky.
Single arm?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
And then I would say those are probably upper body wise. Anytime we do rowing stuff, we try to implement reaching so that the thorax can rotate and move. And from an athlete perspective, when they got to run, your ribs are moving while you run. If you make somebody's ribs really stiff, you see those kids that look like they just run like a cinder block or a refrigerator, those are not good athletes usually. They're good for linemen, but if you're not a lineman, you need to be able to rotate and move. And that being able to train that rotation piece keeps the athlete able to do it. If you train it and you can keep doing it, that's great. And obviously if they don't have it, then you got to teach them how to do it.
When they develop the ability to do it, how much do you pull back on it? Because then it just becomes just to maintain it, correct?
Right, yeah. So usually that's when in season comes. That's usually when we try to keep it in there because then we're probably only seeing them 1 time a week. Let's try to keep it. And then usually out of season, we might keep it like that first block back, especially if we don't see them. That's another thing. If they happen to leave us, season's too crazy, but they come back, we know that that's probably something they need. Our assessment usually shows that they need that. We put it in for a month, get some rotation back, and then we can go back to just kind of training upper back kind of normally with like I say, like chest supported dumbbell row or something like that, then we can actually train both arms together because we kind of restored some motion. And then we try to keep that in their warm-ups and stuff too, that they've got stuff that kind of keeps that stuff fluid.
Adrian spoke earlier about her mile run being this definitive thing. What is one that you have?
It made me want to do this. That is a really good question. I think everyone telling me that I couldn't play basketball as a short, granted I found wrestling, but whenever people told me I couldn't do that, I was kind of like, watch me. But then when I found wrestling, everybody's doing basketball. Their season's over. First game of sectionals. I'm getting ready to go wrestle at semi-state to try to go to state.
The other side though, right?
Yeah.
Because like the wrestlers don't like the basketball players don't like that.
Yep.
So you were a traitor.
Yeah, pretty much.
Then you couldn't go back. Right?
Yeah. Well, even junior year, they were recruiting me. The coach was. He's like, I need a quick point guard, and you don't have to score a lot of points. It's not a mask. I need somebody to bring the ball up the floor, strong, and run the offense. You don't have to even shoot the ball. I just need a good, quick point guard. Somebody that I can rotate in with another. He was kind of running the Kentucky platoon system at the time, so that's kind of what he thought of. I was fast and athletic, and I was like, dude, I'm not even gonna. He's like, I'll make it work with the athletic. No, dude, I'm not playing basketball and wrestling at the same time. No way.
Yeah. Going through your powerlifting career, what's the biggest memory of the height of your career?
For sure, whenever I was at the compound with you guys, and you offered me and Casey as sponsorship, for sure.
Over the Arnold?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. Because in my opinion, the Arnold wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
Maybe I would have competed at it. Would I have been as successful at it? I personally don't think so. I think having the ability to be around everyone that's been affiliated with the EFTS, that took my education of training and my desire to want to be better even more. And I felt like if I did well for myself, that's awesome, but somebody else's logo's on my back. That's not mine. So, how I carry myself, I always try to carry myself well, but now I'm thinking about that's on my back. I don't want that to reflect anywhere near bad towards that, and that's helped me make my decisions.
Give me your side of that day, because obviously I know my side of that day, right? I'll tell you that after you give me your side.
Yeah. So I know initially I wasn't supposed to be in the nasty group, but I had wanted to be, and I had talked to Mark Watts about it, I think, online, and I was like, hey, is there any chance I could do this? I just want to do it. I just want to max out. I'd been to a couple of the seminars. I was like, it looks freaking awesome. It'd just be fun. So then I started, warming up, and I wasn't really I used wraps a little bit, but nothing crazy that day. And then whenever you said you were going to give the sponsorship out, that's when Casey was in there. Me and Casey had kind of been shooting the shit a little bit, but nothing crazy. But then there was like a whole nother level. I was like, well, I need to get some freaking stronger knee wraps on and keep going up. And then that's when I think that was the first time I'd squatted a little over 500. Bench press, I can't remember what I hit that day, low 300s. And then deadlift wise, I took a shot at like something stupid to try to catch Casey, something I would have never put on the bar. It was like 530 or something like that. And, I didn't know where the point systems were and obviously what I was going to weigh. I was definitely heavy at the time because I didn't have a meet anywhere near sight. And then, after Casey won, I mean, what can I be mad about? I did the best I could do. Casey was a better lifter than me. He held himself with class, so got to know him better. And then obviously when you called me up there too, that was it was kind of hard it was really surreal, I guess. It didn't seem real until probably like a week later. So
on my side of that, we didn't even know that we were going to give sponsorships away that day, right? It was just, for those that don't, the nasty group was part of a seminar, was a learn to train seminar that we had, and there was groups for each rack, and it's just teaching people how to squat, bench, and deadlift. But then we had one that were more advanced, that competitors that it's funny, right? There's two reasons why we had it, because it creates a different experience for the more advanced lifters, right? It also takes a lot of the lifters that are really, really good lifters, but at that time I didn't feel their coaching level was good enough to be able to run a whole rack of 14 people. This is nothing against their ability to coach and work with crews and all the other kind of stuff. It's different, now, when you're coaching people, when you got 15 people, one after another, and one person trying to fix the technique and okay, they should be close, they should be wide, they should sit back, they should sit down, all that other kind of stuff. So I could take all those other ones that were in the process of learning how to do that better and throw them all down there. So
Right.
you 15 guys go down there and you train these motherfuckers like you would if they were in a crew in your
Right,
gym,
yeah.
right? And so that's it's a weird thing, right? Because everybody else wants to be in that group that are in the other groups, and it's kind of like, nah, you just got to learn how to keep your feet flat.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep,
it's like
yep.
there's
And I was in that group at one point too. I did a couple seminars where I was in those groups getting the basics.
it's like
worked on.
there's a lot of other stuff we need to do before you do that. Then I think it was Bob, Brian, maybe a couple, like 3 or 4 people.
Chad was in that group.
Yeah. They all came out around during the day, like, man, you got a couple guys down here that are really, they're good, man. And they could really be good. And I'm like, you know, who? You know, and I kind of knew both of you guys a little bit beforehand. And then that conversation started. Then I'm like, well, what do you guys think? You know, that way, and somebody, maybe Bob's obviously
Yeah.
the biggest dick of the whole group, right?
Yeah.
Well, we're going to do this. We're going to, like a best lifter thing or whatever it's going to be. It's Wilkes or I don't know what the
I think we
frick he
used Wilkes then because Dots wasn't around.
Yeah, I don't know what it was. I'm like, yeah, that's cool. Whatever you guys want to do. And then as this whole thing's playing out, they're like, man, I don't know what. We can't just pick one. And I'm like, fine, we'll take them both. You know. Meanwhile, I'm like going on Google and shit. You know, because I'm
Yeah.
like, who exactly are these people? Are they going to represent the brand? Well,
Right,
I know
yeah.
who they are. I kind of know. And but it turned out to be a really cool thing. It turned out to be a great thing because
Yeah.
10 years later, you got a gym. I mean, you have done, and Casey as well, you have done everything that I want to see somebody do, you know, that's under the Elite FTS name, you know, the live, learn, pass on. You understand what
Yeah,
that
oh, yeah.
means to me more than what most people do. But when you can see that actually unfold, you know, to the point where you have your own gym and you're helping these kids and you've overcome a lot of the adversity things that you've had to overcome, that's awesome.
Yeah.
You know, that to me, that's like, that was a really, really good fucking selection.
Yep.
You know, Casey was a really good selection. Those are good things. And there are other people that were responsible for helping come to that decision, which makes that decision even more cool, right? Because there's other team members that said, no, these are the people that would represent really well, which that makes it kind of even more full circle with
Right.
that. As you've gone through, actually, with business, like I said, it becomes brutal. There's adversity. What is, since you've had the business, what's the most adverse thing you've had to deal with?
Cancer or COVID. She had cancer in 2019, and then the COVID shutdown literally was 6 months later.
No, it was. Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So I
All
mean,
right, so
that was basically a year of a shit show. I mean, because I quit the full-time job that I was doing while you had cancer. I mean, that wasn't the reason why, but I mean, I started making calculated decisions. I'm like, the gym's gonna be fine. So, you know, you're going to all these cancer treatments. I'm having to not go to work and not get paid anyways. So why don't I just freaking spend time with you as much as I can because you got cancer. I mean, good thing is that we knew that she was probably going to come out on this on the right side. Like her chances of not coming out on the right side were good. So that wasn't like, you know, I've only got 2 months left with my wife, but you know, cancer hurts no matter what. But we at least had a good positive prognosis that everything was going to be okay. So then I eventually quit that full-time job and was at the gym full-time. But part of that decision too was if I just take half the time that I'm putting in this other person's job into my business, the business is going to explode. And surely enough, that's what happened. Revenue jumped 50% in like 4 months. I mean, it was a stupid amount. I don't know if that's because I could do more on social media from a marketing and I could actually feel like I was driven a little bit more because I didn't have to rely on that. I now didn't have that paycheck to rely on. But then once you got basically better, COVID basically hit in March. So, I mean, you were cancer free 4 months and then the gym shut down for 3 months.
So how'd this cancer thing come about? Like, so what, you feel like shit?
I'll let you tell that story because it had some powerlifting. Well, that was the first time I truly ever coached you. So
Yeah, I had just started like seriously getting into powerlifting. Brandon was coaching me, and I actually did my first meet with cancer. I didn't know. I was like falling asleep before deadlift, and I like chugged half a spike before I went to go lift, and I was super disappointed because I barely got what, like 3 weeks before I had pulled super easily, and I could barely pull it that day. I didn't know why, of course, but I had a huge lymph node in my neck that was just chilling. And of course, I was 24, so you don't ever think that you have cancer. That's not the first place your brain goes. So I think I even we had a PT that was coming to the gym, and I asked her about it. And then when I finally got to go see my doctor, we did all the tests, and then he was like, hey, let's do an ultrasound. And then they started finding more in my chest. And at this point, I'm like freaking out because I'm like, it's all over me. Like, what's going on? And then I had Hodgkin's lymphoma, and my medicine, whatever. I had 6 months of chemotherapy every 2 weeks. And people at the gym were awesome. That's probably the first time that I felt like that I was like, I'm biased, but we have an awesome community there. I had people from Elite reach out to me, and that meant so much that we weren't doing this alone. 'Cause it's, again, at 24, it's really scary to have a doctor tell you that you have cancer. But yeah, that's about how it came about.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's how it came about. How did it progress? So you're going through treatments. He quits his job, right?
Yeah, so actually I started my first treatment in August, and by September they did another PET scan, and I was cancer-free. I was technically in remission, but that's normal. That's how it was supposed to react, so I still had to finish the rest of my treatments. And in November, you mentioned this, you got your hernia surgery.
Oh, yeah. So I knew I was going to quit. So I had a hernia that I was dealing with. And so I had the health insurance piece. I was like, well, I'm going to be self-employed. That's going away real quick. So I kind of used that and got it looked at and got it repaired to use that health insurance benefit that I still had before it was gone.
So we were both out for a while because, like, I had just had treatment, and then you were in from surgery, and, like, we're both still working pretty much 2 full-time jobs at this point. And that was probably the first time I wasn't afraid when we opened the gym. I wasn't afraid after 6 months or a year or whatever. But whenever he said that he was going to quit his job, that was probably the first time I ever was like, ooh, I don't know if that's such a good thing to do right now. But again, I trust Brandon, and he's really good with numbers, and obviously it worked out really well.
Why did you think it wasn't a good? Was it the insurance part?
Yeah. So I was getting insurance through my job, so obviously I couldn't quit. But I guess I also just was in this mentality of, like, we were grinding so hard for like
year and a half,
almost 2 years, and, like, I was in the mindset that I was like, this is just going to be the rest of our lives. Like, we're working all the time. Like, the only break that we got was maybe 7 hours of sleep. And so I'm just in this mentality that, like, we need to keep going. We can't stop. And obviously my cancer, my total bills, I don't even know if we ever came with a total. I just remember getting like a $19,000 bill and being like, what are we going to do with this? Like, we have a gym baby right here, and kind of freaking out about it. But we actually had someone who, I don't know who it was, but they gave us a check for what was it, $14,000. We don't know who it was, but when was that they sent that?
I want to say it was around Christmas time.
Yeah, because I know it was after, because I just remember
you were done with it.
They gave it to us, and I just remember opening it and just, like, bawling because, like, I'd never gotten a $19,000 bill before in the mail, and
yeah.
With Brandon quitting his job, I'm like, we're ruined. Everything that we've worked so hard for is just going to be gone. And I kind of felt like it was my fault because I'm the reason that all these bills are coming. But it obviously turned out all right.
Yeah.
Well, that's not going to be the first time that you're going to feel like that.
Yeah.
So just to let you know.
Yeah.
It's like a conditioning thing. When she was diagnosed, when you decided to quit your job, was there a piece of that obviously so you could have more time, for the treatments and all the other stuff, but did the training facility become more real at that point?
For sure. I mean, I was
Like
there a lot more. I mean, I was already there a lot, but I mean, we didn't have any employees. Was Andrew an intern then?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we had an intern, Andrew, at the time. He was instrumental during that time for sure. Talk about a resume builder there. But I think just that was one of those things where, like, yeah, I was at the gym a lot and, wanted to spend time with her, but then it was like, I can focus that energy, all this energy that I'm putting in to make a paycheck. Now I can put it into the kids that I'm, I only had a couple kids at the time, but the kids that I'm working with, I can try to promote the brand more. I can try to get out and talk to people. I can go watch the kids play more, which is our best free publicity thing we can do. When you're working a full-time job, 50 hours a week, you can't go watch those games.
Well, when it's all you have, it forces you to have to figure out how to make it monetize.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Where I wonder if that, if that didn't happen, if the growth would have not happened.
Yeah. Not been as so quick. Yeah.
Because it's easy to get complacent.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Where now it's like, fuck, this is now every hour has to count.
Yeah.
It has to matter. And so you get the double whammy, right? So you get through this, then you get shut down. So how do you manage that?
So luckily, Indiana was probably one of the more lenient states. I think we also kind of opened through a loophole too, which I'll talk about here in a minute. But we kind of basically sent an email out like, hey, this sucks. We hope that everybody's obviously safe. We tried to say that. She was still able to work because her full-time job was considered necessary because she worked with a special needs population that needed supervision. So she was still going to work. So we still had that income coming in. And I just explained, here's where we're at. We're going to take this week by week. I wrote up some training templates and emailed them all out to the kids and the parents, put them available on our website, and started making exercise index videos to them so that they could actually see me do the exercise. That way, if they couldn't remember, they could know how to do it. And then I remember she was at work. I can't remember how many people we had in our system, but I hand wrote a letter to every single kid or parent. Every single one of them, mailed them all out. Told them we're looking forward to seeing them hopefully, in a month to summer, sooner than later. And then we also, when we emailed them, we said, hey, if you're able to stay on our billing and you like what Thirst is doing for you and your family and your community, we just ask that you continue to pay. We're not going to take your money and run off with it. We're going to keep track of how long you pay. And then when we are allowed to open, we're going to over-deliver on your training, but then we're going to give you all that back plus some. And a lot of people just said, well, not that we have a lot of them, but a lot of the kids that we have are their parents are in considered needed jobs at the time. Teachers, doctors, lawyers, people that I don't want to say that come from money, but their jobs were not like, oh, you just don't work anymore. We're like, gyms were one of the hardest hitting industries. And so most people were like, you know what, that's completely okay. I think we lost maybe less than 5% of our people that couldn't justify it. And then when we did open, because we were using a scheduling system, Indiana said that if you have a business that can operate by appointment only, you can open on this date, which was 2 weeks before they would plan to do the full slow easing back in. And so, we were like, get on your app, start scheduling. Here's what we're going to do. You've got to be, even the power lifters, we're like, we want you to come in at this time if you can. And if you need to come in a different other time. And then they eventually expanded it to where it had to be so many people per square foot. Well, we had 7,000 square foot and we're, I don't want to say a small operation, but at that time we didn't have 100 power lifters. So basically we didn't have to start regulating that anymore and they could start coming in. So they got to be ahead of the Planet Fitnesses and what have you, those gyms that struggled.
Was that the loophole that you're talking about?
Was the scheduling piece, yeah.
Which we actually started doing that before COVID and we still have kept that.
Yeah,
It was advice.
Well, that's what I was going to ask is what were some of the things that you had to implement during then that you kept because it actually became more efficient?
Yeah, that was one of them for sure. I mean, when we started really, really early, there wasn't actually a scheduling system that we used. But as we got more, we started using it, and then now it got to the point where you have to use it. There's no way we'd be able to manage our business otherwise. So that's the way it goes now.
Has there been any time after that to where you both kind of question, like, why are you doing this?
Having the gym,
Yeah.
there's some days where I'm like, man, it would just be nice to wake up, have a 9 to 5, come home, completely forget about what I got to do work-wise, and on the weekends I can do whatever I want. I don't want to ask for time off.
Well, there's like a piece of every day you do
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
right? So no, I'm talking bigger than that.
Okay.
You know, like,
There is sometimes a piece of me that misses collegiate strength conditioning.
Yeah.
That atmosphere, it's just very unique. I feel like it's also a very instrumental time in some of those young men and women's lives, and you get to meet so many people, sometimes by choice, sometimes by not. You know, if you lose your job, you got to up and move. I think there's some cool benefits there, but sometimes I miss that part of it. But I don't really think so, not off the top of my head. Not now, anyways. Now that this is all I do full time, I mean, getting up early sometimes sucks. Being up late sometimes sucks. If an employee's sick and we got to be at work, that sometimes sucks. But that's
it changes though, because it's when it's like a perception of strength. Like if a young kid goes into a gym that everybody there benches over 315, the 315 is not a big bench, right? Now if they then go to another gym where everybody benches over 400, it's kind of the same thing, right? When you get swapped, with cancer and COVID, kind of at the same time, it's like the person calling off work that's supposed to show up is not like that big of a deal.
Right.
It's like, okay, whatever. Yes, it sucks.
Yeah.
But I think your perception of adversity kind of changes. It shifts because the bigger things happen, which makes
for sure.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think we had talked about that, and I was like, pretty sure we can handle anything at this point. Like,
yeah. And well, it prepares you. If there is anything worse, it kind of prepares you for here's the process to be able to go through, with that. And now on the athlete side, because I asked about the Gen Pop side, what's an example of an athlete that did something you knew they were capable of doing, but they didn't know they were capable of doing?
Physically, or just
or just in general?
I think Mackay going to Harvard. We had a kid that went to Harvard.
What's the story there?
So I'm not going to lay out his full background story, but he had a rough childhood. Mm-hmm. Nobody believed in him, and he had a football coach that did, and the football coach wanted nothing but the best for him, and this particular person helped pay for that kid to come train with us because he thought that he had, one, the talent to go play at the next level, and he wanted structure in the kid's life so he didn't fall back onto the things that his parents did. So he was doing pretty well academically through middle school, apparently. In high school, he seemed to just click with academics. But athletically, he wasn't the most athletic kid. Wasn't starting varsity freshman, sophomore year. But by the time he came to us, he was on varsity, but his junior year, the goal was get him on the start, get him starting, get him moving better, get his footwork better, get him more fluid. And the coach's job, obviously, was teaching football. But he's like, I want him in here 3 times a week to get him ready for football, and we're going to keep him 3 times a week, even in season, which that kind of allows, like, man, I don't know how this kid's going to balance all this. But, coach is paying for it, and, he's kind of not giving the kid an ultimatum, but, he's trying to give the kid structure, and he's like, he's going to be in at 6 a.m. every single day. More power to me, because there's very hardly any athletes. Like, we have a couple, but that's tells me right then the kid's serious. And then over time, like, his academics keep going well. He gets really good. By senior year, I think he was second in conference with tackles at linebacker, getting recruited or getting looked at by Yale, Harvard, some Ivy League schools. And we knew this kid was smart. You can just tell the way his mannerisms, the way he talked. Really good kid. And, like, he literally drives himself to the gym 6 in the morning to train hard. And then eventually he applied to almost every Ivy League school, got turned down by every single one of them except for Harvard. And that's the one he wanted. Mm-hmm. And so to watch a kid, like, come in that early, do that for almost 2 years and go do that, and then go play football at that level, a kid that basically came from no money, parents, I don't know where they are in the picture. He might have some idea, but they obviously had other issues that just left him behind. So he lived with grandma, but was still wanting to it got to the point where the training got to be his choice. The coach said, I'm happy with what I see. We really don't need to come 3 times a week, but he wanted to. And he's like, this is coming Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, 6 a.m. That was just part of his structure of his life for almost 2 years because he wanted to go play at Harvard. And he's like, I'm going to do everything I can. And if coach is going to help make sure that I can be here, then that's what it is. And then because of that, we now actually have a scholarship program that we do where we actually have a kid that we do that for out of our pocket. And so that's an application. Again, good grades and all that stuff are important. That's the forefront of it. But just watching a kid do that, we said there's always got to be one kid in our area that's like this kid. He just needs the financial resources for somebody to give a shit about him. And we're like, we're in that position. We can do that. So obviously that coach isn't coaching anymore, unfortunately. So we don't have a lead. So we have an application process. But that's kind of made me think about how I can change kids' lives outside of obviously coaching and doing a business. But how can I do one kid? Can I get another kid to go to Harvard or Yale or whatever their aspirations are? So
What about some of the other kids, just starting, be going from not starting at all to starting, or other
Walt.
stories like that?
I think Walt.
And what's that?
Yeah.
There's a kid named Walt. Probably the first 2 months or so, really good kid, but just watching him, athletically, you're like, I don't know if this kid's got it. Like, I want to help this kid, but man, this is gonna be some work. And sure enough, like now, I mean, he's a swimmer. He's actually a pretty good swimmer now. But he is actually being in the gym. He, for whatever reason, his dad just says that he loves training. Like, he's like, I don't know what it is about training that he likes, but he's like, coming to Thirst is the best part of his day. When he can't come during swim season, it eats him alive. That's what he can't wait to do, is when swim season's over, he wants to get back to Thirst. And he's actually done some of our charity bench and deadlift meets because he wants to try powerlifting once swimming's over. That's a kid, honestly, like, I think 90% plus of people probably would have gave up on just because of how badly he moved and just like how awkward that he was the first month or two. But like, once we got him to open up and see how he was as a kid, and we're like, this is a good freaking kid. He just needs help moving better, and that's why he's here. And then you pour that energy into him, and then he jokes around and picks on some of the powerlifters, and the powerlifters pick on him back. It just builds a really good community. And now we got a kid that's interested in weights that arguably it probably wasn't even his idea to get in the weight room anyways. He probably just wanted to gain a little bit of weight, and that was it.
How'd you get him to open up?
Really just kind of was just almost like jokes, and he's got his sense of humor is like very, I don't know how to describe it. It's very
dark.
It's awkwardly dark.
Yeah.
But like, it was one of those things where like, as a powerlifter, that's nothing new.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what it was. It's just like, this kid's kind of ate up, but I'm going to give it right back to him. And he's giving it to me. So, like, that's usually how it goes. Sometimes, we talk to parents about stuff that first before we kind of let them in. But some parents like, give them hell, dude. I don't care what you say to them.
One of the things with some of the more quiet kids is just because we know the people coming in the weight room, it can be really intimidating, and sometimes, like Brandon was saying, it's not their idea to be there, like dad wants them to be there. So if they are really quiet, my personal goal is to get them to laugh or smile. Like, just one time, it might be a stupid joke, I'll say something or whatever. And so with this kid, I definitely had that goal because he was so quiet and he wouldn't talk to anybody. And so I would just always say something to him, or he would be working and just have that RBF face. And I'm like, Walt, you need to stop looking so happy to be here. And then he would kind of like crack a smile. And then I think he just started, opening up and just feeling like it was a safe place.
And then
to
seeing
be.
the gains that he got, both movement-wise from sports, and then also being able to put on a little bit of weight. And then I started giving him like some floor presses because we're trying to clean up his movement first. And I was like, I'm going to give you some barbell work, but you're also only 14. Like, we don't need to bench press right now. You can't do a push-up well, so let's knock that out of the park first. But then at the same time, when I saw he was interested in it, then I started to do the like, I'm going to kind of feed him a little bit of what they like, blowing his arms up at the end of one day, blowing his legs up at the end of another day, because I knew he wasn't playing sports. I'm not like trying to hurt him or anything, but just give him a sick pump or whatever. And like, that builds confidence in the kid. He walks out and his freaking arms feel massive to him.
Yeah.
And like that gets them excited to train. And then you start giving them some of the floor press or some of the stuff that they're wanting to ease into bench press or whatever. Then they, that's what they see is so-and-so's, which like I said, being around all those strong lifters, we got guys that are squatting, pulling 600-700 pounds raw on a weekly basis. They're numb to that now. To them, 6 reds on the side on a barbell doesn't mean anything to them. But like most kids are like, man, that's 400 pounds looks like a lot. And then, this kid's probably like, I see a 700-pound squat every day, man.
Yeah.
That ain't nothing. That's what I want to do. And I'm, he may only be at 225, but that's kind of what I think got him into it. And now I think he likes the atmosphere that we have too. He just has a good relationship with both of us and our coaching staff that makes it fun to go train because you're around coaches that care about you, but at the same time, they're going to give you workouts that are going to help you do what you want to do.
I think the big part about what you said is, the cliche is meet them where they're at, right? And most coaches think that means, the way that you coach strength training is, they can't do a bench press yet, so have them do push-ups. That's not what it means.
No.
It means, try to find that common ground to where you can start to build it. Because the training's not going to matter if you can't build the relationship.
Right, 100%.
And figuring out how to build the relationship is, what gives you guys an advantage over competitors that are bigger because swipe your card, come in, do this, do that. They're not doing that. It's figuring that piece out.
I mean, I would say that probably almost every single person, we can try to say hi and bye to every single person that walks in by first name, sometimes even last name. We can name every single person that walks in by first name and last name, where they go to school, what sports they play, probably tell you a little something about them from their siblings, their dog, or, what they got a dance recital coming up, whatever it is, we can usually relate on that. And I think if you can't check those boxes as a trainer, you're not doing your freaking job because, well, the training's great. The training's everywhere. It's not the training that the training is part of it. It's that gets them in the door to get started, but then they stick around for the people and the experiences that you provide. I feel like our staff, on top of her and myself, we really get that, and I think that gets people continuing to come back. And then they say good things about us when they talk to a friend and say, what about that gym that you're going at? It looks like a lot of powerlifters, and people's like, those people are just awesome people. It's a great place to be. So like the workouts are tough, sure, but I can go there and talk to people, and it's not like, man, I gotta go to the gym, put my headphones in, and wander around for 40 minutes and then go home. Like we get people to stick around for 2 hours, and an hour of it's because they're just chilling.
When going back to what I was saying earlier is when you're married and you're business together, it's like a 24-hour thing, right? Where you spoke a little bit earlier, like you work from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed. That's never going to change, by the way. You can think it's going to, but it will a little bit, but it's always going to be on your head, in your head to some degree. Just from the business side, what would be something that you've seen her do that was just in your mind, you're like, man, that was fucking awesome?
The coaching cue. I don't know if it's business-wise, but as a coach, she was explaining to a kid on how to do a hinge. It might have been their first day. She's like, you ever moon somebody? The kid's kind of like, what? You're basically going to moon somebody. And sure enough, that kid got that hinge down like rep 2. Better than I've seen 90% of lifters hinge sometimes. So that was, from a coaching perspective, that was definitely the one thing. I still use that sometimes. Business-wise, oh, man. I think anytime I watch you do an assessment with almost any female, the immediate rapport you can get with them, like as a guy, it's always going to be hard for me to get that. But like you can almost just do it without even thinking about it. And I'm like, how am I going to approach this girl so I don't seem creepy? I got to put my hand on them, so I got to ask. And like, I want to try to make small talk, but like, what am I going to? She doesn't want to talk to a meathead about what her school day was. It's fine. Like that's very hard. I have to put a lot of thought into that. Where like, I feel like when she talks to other females, when she's, especially that first day, because that's the hardest part. I just feel like it almost automatically happens. Like she didn't have to even try for it. So I'm pretty envious of that.
Same question.
There's a lot, not to be a suck up. But I mean, just Brandon's knowledge in training people. I mentioned earlier that I've learned more from him than I have from 4 years of school. And I I feel like I can go to you any training question, and sometimes you're like, why don't you just look this up? And I'm like, you're gonna give me a way better answer than what I can find, and I can have I can have some dialect back with you about it. And to me, I think that's really valuable, because I know I think training and people mess it up all the time so easily, and you have so much knowledge about it. And business wise, just like every decision that you make, I know for a fact that you've already sat on it for weeks.
But what
days.
if you disagree?
I usually don't, or if I do, I'll say, hey, what about this side of it?
Mm-hmm.
Or that sounds like a good idea, but what if this happens? And honestly, for as long as he's already been sitting on it, he usually already has an answer for that. And if it's a good one, I'm like, all right, okay. And I think, that's probably the top two.
When you ask the questions on your story for, we were talking about this earlier, and I now forgot, what those questions that people sent you were. What did we cover all of them?
Getting in the one that was getting into personal training and how to get started.
Yeah,
that one.
that one.
That was one we didn't get to.
Yeah, let's get into that.
So I can kind of guess I say how I got into it, and honestly, not that my method is best, but looking back, I think there's a lot of ways that people could do this. If you're going to college, this is undoubtedly the way that I would go. So I started personal training at Purdue, and I was doing school there, and really I was just looking for a part-time job, and I was like, I can go work at the rec center, clean up weights, whatever. That's super easy. I'm already there all the time anyways. And then I was like, well, they had a personal training job open. I was like, they were taking a couple of them, and I was like, I'll apply for this. It's what I want to do anyways. So I got accepted for it, but they had a couple of basic things that they had to do. First, you had to pass your CPT exam. I was like, okay, well, I was going to have to get this anyway, so I'm going to knock this off the table. And my continuing education is going to come from school, so I'm basically getting free I don't say free, paid for school, but I'm getting the continuing education part built into my schooling, so I don't have to go to a bunch of seminars or whatever. And that credential helps me. But then my boss at the time, he had it to where we had to pass his own exam. So he wanted us to be more knowledgeable than just the book piece of the CPT. He wanted to ask some general training questions of, if you're working with a client 2 days a week, what would your ideal structure look like? It was one of those things where there wasn't really a right or wrong answer. They just wanted to see if you would think critically about how you were going to do some training programs. And then you had to walk him through a sample training program. He'd be like, hey, I'm 55-year-old Lisa with low back pain. Put me through a workout. Let's assume that, everything else checks out. We're ready for my first day of workouts. And then that's how you could start training people. So one, I think if you think of most personal trainers in the industry, if most people are like, I've never done anything like that, that would probably get people to think immediately more about what they do when they train people. But then I had that 2 years of training, and I say this politely, dumb college kids as clients that just had too much money. They didn't know anything about lifting, and they wanted to learn about lifting. So I got paid to make mistakes with people that didn't know that I was making mistakes. That's the best. That's the best experience that you could ever get. What else are you going to ask for in a job? I mean, I can't think of many jobs where you get paid to make mistakes on somebody else's dime, and then they don't even know you're making them. Mm-hmm. And so I did that the whole time I was at Purdue, and then interned through the strength and conditioning department and whatnot. But that's kind of how I got started. And so when people come to me, I'm like, if you're a college kid, go see if you can work as a personal trainer at the rec center and do exactly that, because you'll learn a lot, because they're doing all the marketing and everything else. All you got to do is just show up and train the people. That's the easiest part, in my opinion. And then you can actually say, well, I've got experience getting people some results, playing around with some ideas. You can build a clientele base. If maybe they're not going to have them forever, but you can build a clientele base. And then when you move on, you've at least got that resume builder. Then you've got your degree. You've got your certification done. And then you got an internship probably. You've got a lot of experience going out from just your bachelor's, where somebody that just says, I want to start training people, you don't need a resume, but what are you going to say to the gym owner? What's your reason for training people other than paying whatever the fee is to train people at the gym? So that's the way that I did it, and I thought that worked out phenomenally. Yours was obviously a little bit different, but for beginner people, I'd say try to find a way to get the experience from other trainers, or at least get paid for it that route. And if you can't do that, so you're not in school, then the internship is finding somebody to mentor you on how to train people is undoubtedly the best thing. You got people that offer online coaching that have literally never trained a physical person in front of them, and they're just typing on a keyboard, keep your lats tight, and that's great. But what if they don't know what the frick that means?
Yeah. Adrian, how would you answer it?
So I started very similar to Brandon with schooling, and then I started working at the rec center, and then through working at the rec center, I don't even know how it happened, they had like group fitness instructors, they needed some, and my boss knew that that's what I was wanting to do, and so she said, hey, come do it, essentially. And they were like, what classes do you want to do? And I actually ended up teaching a cycling class, which sucked. Like, you don't want to sit in that saddle for an hour. It was rough. But I started out with group training, so I felt like for me that was an awesome experience, because nobody in my classes was doing crazy things, because I was kind of anal about it. I'm like, if you're squatting wrong, I'm not going to stop the whole class, but I'm going to fix you. And then, like, whether usually it's just like a goblet squat or something, I'm like, we're going to fix it. And then I would spend maybe 5 minutes with that person, maybe not even 5 minutes, fix it, and then go about, like, so I felt like whenever I was doing my classes and look around, I'm like, we have 10 people here squatting perfectly. This makes me very happy. So that was my experience. And then I had a really awesome professor before I had graduated who hooked me up with a big business in Terre Haute, and they hired me as an independent contractor as a trainer for their facility, which was a huge thing to have without even graduating. But she was like, I've seen what you do. She's like, you work well with people. You've got good recommendations. Come check this out. And so I started building a clientele base at this, what is Beam? Factory. And so then I was doing mostly one-on-one there with people. And so I got that experience there. And then obviously I met Brandon, and he again helped me with training those people. Because honestly, from my degree when you just are graduating, I was like, I don't know how to do a program. I don't know. I know what a group fitness class should look like, but I don't know what any of this. And Brandon really guided me on a lot of that stuff. So I would say, like Brandon was saying, find people who are smarter than you and are doing a good job, and just watch and listen. Ask questions. Ask as many questions as you can, and take all of that material and go forth with it.
And I think your answer is going to be biased, right, as ours all are. But do you think somebody should have that personal one-on-one experience or small group experience before they do anything online?
I do, yeah, for sure.
Why?
I mean, for me, the number one thing is the communication piece. It's really, like I said, it's really easy to just type off, keep your lats tight, or keep your hips underneath you, or usually those people you're working with have a background of training to some extent to where they're probably going to know what that means, so that can make you appear that you're a good coach. But I tell our interns, and somewhat jokingly but seriously, I will take a coach that can get a 8, 9, 10-year-old to hinge before I'll take a coach that can get a power lifter to deadlift, because trying to teach a 10-year-old how to hinge is incredibly difficult. Imagine, one, there's obviously a big age gap. There's an understanding gap. There's a line of attention gap. There's just so many gaps between that population that if you can communicate what I want to have happen, what I know what looks like a really good quality hinge, if I can get that down to a 10-year-old level of basically quote-unquote bending over, then imagine what I can do with somebody that already knows how to do that, and I just need to tweak the nuances so to speak, then it's easier to almost like type that off. I'm not saying you have to go train kids, but adults work the same way. There's adults that have never exercised before in their life. If you can figure out how to navigate that route when it comes to working with more advanced people, one, I think it's super easy in comparison. But two, I think it gives you more of a, I don't want to say it gives you more clout, but it just gives you more of like it gives you more of an experience background to be like, hey, I've worked with the worst, and so now I can build up to working to the best. Where some people are just like, I just want to train powerlifters because I powerlift. That's okay, I guess, but that's not just, to me, that's not the best way to go about it. I think you can learn a lot about coaching and communication from working with some of those older, harder people to work with. It makes it, you can make your delivery better, and you get more practice of how you want to coach something, because like I said, how she coaches something versus me versus my staff, it's all different, but we can get the same thing to happen because of the way that we can deliver what we want to have saying. Understanding how to communicate is huge, and through online training, I feel like that's the gap, is how do you read a sentence can dictate how you even get what you get out of that sentence. And the way that I'm writing it might be great, but the way that you read it might be not so great. And then I got to figure out, how do I do that? So even if you could like Zoom it, to me, that would be better than typing it off. But
yeah, even, I mean, to me, one's training, one's programming.
Yeah, that's another discussion too. Yeah, that's basically, people I think want to be online programmers more than you do trainers, because you're really not training them.
Yeah.
You're giving them the plan, and it's up to them to execute it. Where like when I got people in there, I'm writing the plan and I'm helping them learn how to execute it and getting immediate results off of where I'm putting them in place and all that kind of stuff. Where like they already did the exercise, they already ingrained the bad movement patterns, they're sending it off to you, you're replying back, and then if it's squat day, they can't do it till next week. Yeah. So everything's also delayed. So that's a good point too.
Well, then you may only see 2 reps of the last set of the squat, so you're
that
not
actually
seeing,
break down. Yeah,
you're not seeing the whole thing. Then you're not seeing any accessories. You're not seeing any of the other stuff.
Or just one angle, and
it's very limited.
Yes.
You know, and you remove all nonverbal communication. But the reason I ask this is because a lot of people just simply start there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so now they're ignorant to what they actually don't know because they didn't start. So it would be interesting, you know, as like an interesting case study to take people that have only trained people online, bring in a group of people into a gym.
I would pay to see that.
And say, here, train them, you know, and see what that actually looks like, right? And that would be an interesting. But like I said, sometimes is it biased because that's the path, you know, that we came through. Right. But it's, as you being in the profession and having the gym that you have, gym training center, you have to compete against this with trainers that you're hiring.
Oh yeah. Right.
And it's like 2 different jobs, and I don't know if they see it as 2 different jobs.
Yeah. That's a very good point. It's the good thing is, I would say, with working with athletes in person, it's really, they can certainly go buy something online, but then they're going to have a hard time implementing it because they're just going to be watching videos and trying to figure it out. Where like having a coach immediately there with athletic movements, I feel like that's incredibly important, because teaching them how to run, jump, and things like that, you want that immediate feedback, because watching them on video is great, but chances, that's something you can actually do more frequently as well and not have to worry about that. And even the personal training, I think that another thing that our clients tell us a lot is, you're on my schedule, that's coming out of my bank account every month. I'm motivated to show up. Where, you know, you might be paying for the online programming, but, you know, you might get 2 exercises in and be like, man, I'm just not feeling it today, I'm not going to do it. And then, you know, you can just wipe it off. And then I think that's not as, if your prices are right, you're not going to have that problem. But it seems like the online community for me is, how can we get things cheaper so we can get accessible to more people and get more people on? Which, are you really delivering the results? And again, you're writing the programs, but who knows how much the results you're getting if they're not uploading videos and you're seeing all stuff. They can just be checking marking they're doing it and only doing half the work for.
Yeah, I didn't even think of the client side. I was speaking more from, which it's interesting to think about that, because I didn't connect those 2 dots. You know, like your clients could be thinking, well, I should just buy this football program and just do this thing, which doesn't make sense to me. But it's, you know, I don't live in that world, so. I was thinking more along the lines of the people you would hire as coaches.
Oh,
you know,
okay,
to be able
okay,
to
I
come
understand,
in
yeah.
because now, you know, you're trying to work out some type of incentive, commission, pay, whatever it's going to be, and there's multiple ways to go about doing that. But now you have to also compete with, you know, them being hired by some online.
I think the one thing, not that you can't create a good relationship online, because you can. Because I mean, there's online clients that I met one of them for the first time at Swiss, which is really cool. But and you know, there's obviously a relationship there. But I think when it comes to, at least from the personal training and athlete side, the relationship that you get there if I'm trying to hire a coach, if you're intrinsically motivated and in it for the right reasons, we're going to help you make a living. But it may not be the most lavish thing, but if you're really after that, then you're going to create that relationship with those people. And then who knows what that can lead. I mean, you can meet, that one kid that we were talking about, his dad's our financial advisor. Chances are that he wouldn't be my financial advisor if I didn't meet that kid.
Yeah.
You know, and those are really, really odd, unique circumstances, but you can make that happen in person way easier than you usually can online, because if you've never met them, are you going to go trust somebody with a business recommendation that you've never met? You know, they may dupe you. I don't know. The internet's way easier to dupe somebody, or if I'm training this guy 3 times a week for a year, I probably trust what they're going to tell me.
Yeah.
And I think the relationships that we've made a lot of friendships from the gym. And I think if I'm trying to hire a coach, I'm trying to think about, what is your goal? You're probably not going to be with us forever. I'm going to completely understand that. But how can I set you up next for your next best thing? Because then what I want to happen, if you happen to run into somebody, man, I worked at Thirst. I love working there. If you get the opportunity to work there, intern there, I would do it. For us, that's what I kind of want, is be able to set up their next step if they go on after us. I think that makes the gym and our training facility look better, that we're able to pass that on to those people for their employment's sake. So, but the money side is definitely a big question mark, but we don't limit them being able to work with people online. They just can't train the people that come to our gym online. So there's somebody else in town they want help with online, by all means. But, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If you can get them to come train at the gym, that's more training hours that you can get, which is then going to increase your revenue. And we're doing all the work on the back end. You just got to collect the paycheck. So I think that's another thing that people may not think about, is the logistics business side of it after programming online or whatever.
And Jim Wendler and I have discussed this many times. We talked about it a little bit on the last podcast that we did, is when you're all online, you don't see the accolades, right? Actually, what you see is 90% negative.
Yep.
So I can say this out of 25 years experience. What I see is 98% negative. It's very little is it ever positive. So you live in this really weird world where you're making a difference. You think you are, but you really don't know, right? You think, and then that becomes, weird, even more weird when you start looking at staff, because they have no fun clue, so you become removed from that, and you learn how to kind of navigate that, because Jim lived that, for a while. Then when he started coaching, and doing it with the high school kids, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
There's still, everybody has to still deal with criticism and all that other kind of stuff, but it's completely turned around, where it's like, holy shit, this kid came in having a bad day. Now he has a good day.
Yep.
And it's because of something that I did. And it's like that immediate feedback loop, like it matters, it's making a difference, and you don't have to convince yourself that it's making a difference. And that is something that I don't know how you value that. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But there's definitely got to have value to that, because if all you do is that online stuff, and I don't do that, but I can kind of relate to that, because it's online. Everything we do is online.
Yep.
Is now you're putting your head down and you're working 6-8 hours a day or whatever it is, and you're sending emails, and it's all this digital stuff, and then that's it. Like, what did you see? Any PR that you saw might have been a video.
Yep.
And that's
not very tangible at all.
That's not the same.
No.
It's not the same as when you see that's why I still have little training groups that come in here. When you see somebody getting physically stronger, even at any level, that's cool.
Yeah, very cool.
That's worth it. And the only thing that if I was to have a wish out there for anybody, is dabble in both.
Yeah.
Right. So then you can make that decision, knowing
Yeah.
that maybe maybe financially you can be better going all online, but this is what you're going to give up for that.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm trying to think if I was a client and I'm looking at 2 people to hire, one has only ever trained people online. That's all they know. And the other one they've been online for a little bit, but they've trained people in person for the same amount of time. I'm taking the person that's trained people in person probably every single time, unless if there's some really weird circumstance. But because I'm like, I know that if they did that for that long a time, they had to be good at what they did if they made a living off of it. You can't suck making a living training people. I mean, it doesn't work that way. The proof is in the pudding and being able to financially stay afloat. We're online, there's so many people that you could dupe out of it, and you don't know what the turnover rate is. You have no idea what that is. That's the thing is they could do a month and be done, but if they're getting people to always come back, they can still stay afloat. Where like with in-person, if you start losing clients or getting negative reviews or something like that, it's going to snowball fast, very fast.
Oh, yeah.
And then you're probably not going to be in business very long.
Well, it's also going to be a wake-up call for you.
Yeah.
Like, maybe since the common factor here is me.
Yeah. And it's amazing how people don't realize that they're the common factor.
Is there any topics that I didn't bring up that you wanted to talk about?
Well, I think the one thing that people also, I think, interested sounded like more of the raw conjugate work.
Yeah, definitely.
I would say that I feel like my name floats around in that circle a lot, mainly because, one, when I picked it up, when I started with Elite, I was one of, 4 raw people? Me, Jen, Casey, and Vinny, I think, were the first 4. And Jen used conjugate a little bit, but we know Jen. Jen's Energizer Bunny. I don't know what Jen does.
Yeah, she's doing everything.
So really, I was the only one truly doing conjugate on the team from a raw perspective, and I think the way that I had modeled that around what my goals were and how I could progress were different than what you would see out of Westside Barbell Book of Methods or, like you said, Matt or whoever. And so I think a lot of people drift to me. They want to learn conjugate raw. I would say probably online people that I work with, probably 70 to 80% are doing something similar. I've got that other 25% that are just either your average Joes or we're using regular block training because that's what they like. But that's probably the other big thing I think of that people probably are interested in from what I've done.
What were the differences that you had to make? What were the changes that you had to do?
So I tried a circuit max phase raw, and that did not go well, needless to say. And what I found was for that, I actually changed it to where from a squat perspective, I used chain instead of band. And I used less chain weight and I used more straight weight. So I basically went during that normal phase that you would do for circuit max. After I totally screwed up with the bands, it didn't work so well. I was like, well, the reason it didn't work so well is because the band tension was too high and I could hardly stabilize the weight and it was just shoving me to the ground and I couldn't get out. And as a raw lifter, I didn't want the box there. I was trying to use it to get ready for a meet. So I don't want the box there because the box is not going to be there on meet day. And so I thought, well, what if I invert this where I just have a good amount of chain weight, more than I normally use for speed work, but just a little bit more. But then I just load up over a wave on my dynamic day and just keep adding over, I think it was over 4 weeks, load up like that to where I take a heavy single with that 35% band tension. And then basically you've got 10 days to the meet and then you're done. And ironically enough, that was a meet where, so I remember vividly, I hit 385 plus about 140 in chain in sleeves for a single in my garage, no spot or anything like that. And that came out to, whatever that comes out to, low 500s. And I knew in my sleeve squat at the time was like in the low, I think it was like 455 or so was the best that I'd done. And so I was like, okay, so that's basically what I had in the bottom. And then at the top is where I had that 500-ish. And I went to the meet and squatted, I think it was 510, basically what was on the bar at the top.
Now, was there a week that you didn't have any chain on before the meet?
Yeah, the max effort day had no chain.
All right, so the speed day, okay.
Yeah.
And
that was I think that week where I took that big single, I want to say that max effort lower day that I squatted, all I did was work up to a last warm up, like mid 80%ish. So it felt good and normal.
The chain weight was 35%, did you say?
It was about, yeah.
So what was the bar weight? How was that waved?
So that went. I'm trying to think what I started with. I want to say I started with 50%. I think I went 50, 55, 60, and then 62.5 was the last one.
So 4 week, then a deload, and then meet?
Yep.
Okay. What about the bench?
Bench at that time, I used boards and reverse bands to peak my bench.
For max effort?
For max effort, yeah. So I would basically 2 weeks out was when I would take my heaviest bench with just straight up. And then no matter what I did after that, I would take more weight, even if it's more than what I wanted to do at the meet, take 5-10 pounds more and take it to a 2-board. I'm super short, got T-Rex arms. 2-board is a big board for me.
Yeah.
But then usually the week after that, I would then take that third attempt to a 1-board and then basically call it. So basically, I wanted to keep that third attempt in my hand longer, but I didn't want to move it as big of a range of motion because, I'm a small guy. So I need to keep that weight in my hands. Otherwise, meet day, it's going to feel too heavy if I just take it away like that.
Right.
So that's how I've kind of peaked my – that's how I usually peak my bench press.
How'd the speed day look for bench then?
So I always did 3-week waves. And you've talked about this in the past, but I started at 40%. I did 40, 45, 50. I would end at 50, and I know a lot of people like to stay around that 50. For me, I'm a fast lifter. That almost felt too slow. And then I would usually I was doing the normal 8x3, and as my career progressed, I found myself doing more 5s to accumulate the volume and the time under tension. That way, as long as I could keep the bar speed. If the bar speed started to smell really bad, then I would just call it some triples and call it a day.
Deadlift?
I'm like you, I hate deadlift.
Yeah. It came after the squat.
Yeah. Peaking deadlift, so I eventually got to the point where I only deadlifted heavy every other week, and I put it on my dynamic day. And the main reason was I felt that I could not recover from deadlift to save my life. If I pulled anything, so my best pull in a meet was 510. If I pulled anything over 455 in training, I felt like shit for about 4 days. And so when I made the big change to start doing that was because I always squatted on Saturdays and my speed days were on Tuesday. So I was like, how can I get to Saturday and feel good?
Yeah.
And so I basically boiled down to deadlift heavy every other week and put it on dynamic day so I could still squat heavy every week. And it balanced out pretty well. So 1 week would be a speed day. The next would be a max effort variation of whatever I needed or choosing. So the way that I peaked it is I would have to usually look at 6 weeks out because I'm only going to get a couple heavy pulls and that's it. So 6 weeks out, it's usually when I try to determine around what an opener-ish is, and then I take a second attempt off of blocks, speed pull. Week 4, I would just send it.
Yeah.
Biggest single I can take that day, and then I would reverse band something heavier so I can get it in my hands. And then 2 weeks later, 2 weeks out, usually work up to my opener. If that feels good, basically called it, and then I'd speed pull really, really, really light that next week, like 40%, and hope for the best on meet day.
One interesting thing that I found is, regardless of what the training methodology is, if it's powerlifters competing at an intermediate or above level, the squat becomes like this gets laid out first. Like, this is the main thing. The squat gets programmed first. The squat determines everything. Like, here's this day. If the squat doesn't go well, my recovery's not work. It's like the biggest pillar of everything. And that's what it is. It's, my deadlift's fucking my squat up. I got to lower that. And it's interesting, right? Because it doesn't matter what the methodology. It's always that. That's where this gets programmed. Everything falls after that. And then it's probably because it's the one that takes the most out of you. It's the hardest one to recover from. It kind of beats you up. With secondary movements, how did you rotate those being raw?
So I really primarily used almost like I used three 3-week waves and a 6-week wave, if that makes sense. So all my speed work would wave in 3-week waves.
Yes.
But then I'd basically pick 2 max effort movements for my squat and my bench, and I'd alternate back and forth for 6 weeks. And I would basically try to break that PR every other week. So that's especially in the off season. The secondary movement would stay the same for 2 weeks. So basically you've got 2 squat variations, 2 bench variations, only 1 deadlift variation for that time, and then your secondary movements would go 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. So those are changing. So you might have something kind of similar, but those would build on each other based upon what needed to be worked on towards the meet day.
Give me an example of build upon each other.
So, like something I really liked to do was pick a biomechanically harder exercise. So an exercise that challenged me and where I needed it. For me, that was usually anything safety bar related. I was terrible at the safety bar when it came to my squat. So that was usually the first thing that I would pick. And I would usually do like either like some pause work or something like that. The next one then would be an overload. So I worked on a weak point. Now I want to overload the nervous system piece. So if I wanted to stay with the safety bar, for example, then I would reverse span it, but take away the pause. So I can get as much load as I can get on my back for some triples or fives or whatever it was. And then that next 2-week wave would go back to something that is going to resemble the competition movement that I need to continue to work on. That might be a pause squat or a squat versus chains or something like that. Or you can use a low box squat, whatever that might be. That's the way that I tried to think of how to organize those supplemental movements, because that was something I knew that would always work for me very well. If I do it biomechanically, I think Brian Mann's talked about this too, something disadvantage, overload, almost like your realization piece, your body, when you go back to that straight bar, for me, felt so light.
So it became
So
more
light.
specific as you went into the meet.
Right. Oh,
So
yes,
into
for
the
sure.
More realization, so more of the block thing.
Yes.
What about the accessories that fell after that?
So on squat day, I would always do a single leg movement, and then I would usually try to do something that was more for glutes and hamstrings initially, and then as I got closer to the meet, I would push my quads a little bit more because I knew I was getting in the wraps, and I can get out of the hole incredibly quickly. I need to be able to finish that rep. For bench press, this was something that took me time to figure out too, is from a recovery standpoint, I always felt better if I had more of my tricep work on my max effort days and more of my back work on my dynamic effort days. And the main reason was, after having a max effort squat day, a max effort bench day, usually you're pretty toast after you're done benching. And I was like, I got enough energy to do tricep work. That's pretty easy. And that seemed to make sense. And then I had a day off. And then before I went to a dynamic day, and by the time I got to my dynamic upper day, everything felt pretty good. That I felt like I had a good amount of energy to hit my back harder than if I did it on the max effort day. And obviously your intensity is lower on your dynamic days, so you can put more time towards volume. And this is something I got from John Meadows, that your back takes a little bit of time to recover. And so I didn't want my back training again to affect my deadlift.
Yeah.
So it made more sense to kind of keep it there than I did a little bit. I'd still do some pull aparts and face pulls on a regular max effort day, but I'm not doing any chin ups or any rows or any bent rows, because I'm thinking about dynamic. I'm thinking about the day that's coming 2 days later. I'm not thinking about my bench press in the moment. The heavy bench work is done. Let's just hit the triceps. My triceps aren't going to affect my pull for anything. And I implement that still with a lot of lifters today, and a lot of people seem to think that feels really well, because you've almost got a bench press tricep day. Your max effort bench day takes longer than your dynamic. You can blow through back training in 45 minutes once you're done speed benching. I mean, it can be a pretty quick day.
I think that's a huge component, because you have to know what's leaning forward in the week, and then are you going to be recovered for what's coming next?
So I almost thought backwards more than I thought forwards, and it almost just figured itself out over time. And I found this little sweet spot of how hard can I push it, how much can I pull it back, and then it kind of just snowballed.
Yeah. So now meet happens. Then what do you do that week after the meet?
Nothing.
Then
walk, chill out.
Then what's that phase look like? The next phase, right? Because one of the criticism of conscious is it's not phasic, and it is.
Yes, it is. Yep. So I really like doing more hypertrophy work. I try to keep barbell work out for 4 to 6 weeks. If it's somebody really experienced and there's nothing on the horizon, sometimes we'll even go 8 weeks with no barbell work. And I try to make that more bodybuilding-ish, focusing on density more than anything else. Starting pretty light, because I know they're going to be sore. But
define density.
How much training volume you can get in a period of time, or keeping that time lower. So a lot of people just think about volume, and when you talk about trying to get conditioned for powerlifting, I don't think you have to be world-class conditioned, but you've got to be able to get through the meet. Well, that falls off after you're at the meet. If you peaked right, you're using just enough condition to get through the meet, and that's about it.
Yeah.
So you want to restore that back. Well, no meathead wants to run or walk or do anything like that. The best way you can do that's through training through density, and very similar. Like, I think John Meadows did a lot in terms of talking about training with density. Like watching him train, there is no freaking downtime. I mean, he maximizes his rest, but he's not like sitting around on his phone. Like, minute in, he's going, and his back work's done in 50 minutes. Most people, they're still squatting for 50 minutes.
Yeah.
So then you think about like how you can get that in, and then you can build some muscle and keep the tissue, and then that obviously limits your loads that you can use. There's a lot of benefits to that. And then when people start to get that itch to go back to the barbell, now I think we can start, okay, now that we've got the hypertrophy work in, maybe let's squat second or third movement. Let's bench press second, third movement after we've done some flies or some leg curls or leg extensions, get some pre-exhaustion. That way you can't go ham on the main movements.
Yeah.
And then I slowly work it back up to where that's the main movement, and then
So there's a transition phase.
Yep.
So basically a conditioning phase, a transition phase, and then kind of back into
barbell work.
And about that time, you should be thinking about the
Yep.
next meet.
Usually you're thinking about the next meet. You're going to get maybe 4 to 8 weeks of really good, hard, heavy barbell training. And by then, and then you've got a 12-week meet. I mean, that lands itself out pretty well where you're doing about 1 to 2 meets a year where you're going all in on them at least.
So when you're working with lifters on this aspect here, how many times do they come back and say, this isn't conjugate?
Yeah, not as. I don't get it as much as I used to. But I have people. There's a lot of quad work on the squat day. I thought I need to focus on the posterior chain. Well, your squat is not going to have the suit. You're not super wide. The box isn't there anymore. Your quads are doing more than you really think they are. Louie. That's another thing Louie told me too. He's like, one thing he told me when I was there. He's like, your quads are too big for gear. He's like, you need more glutes and hamstrings. That's why you're a good raw squatter, but get you in this gear and they're not going to do shit for you. We need to bring your glutes and hamstrings up. Well, he understood that was important from a raw squatting perspective because the box is there on meet day and you got to be able to stand up and your stance is narrow, all that kind of stuff. So I try to let people know that Louie's not against quad work. He was targeting a specific population that he was working with at the time and being intelligent about it. And they still do quad work, but it's almost like preventative knee health, keep the leg size happy, keep everything happy. It's not about coming out of the bottom of the squat, getting super deep because their stance is narrow and all that kind of stuff. I mean, they're barely hitting 90 degrees in the squats, so the quads aren't doing nearly as much when you sit back that hard.
You just make a really good point with that statement, though, because I was one of those guys when I came into the gym. It's like, my quads were big. It's like, your quads are the same thing. Your quads are too big. Your quads are too big. Your quads are 3 inches bigger than what they need to be. What the fuck are you measuring? They need to be 3 inches. Your hamstrings need to be bigger and all that. And I squatted in like single ply. I didn't know double ply shit existed. I didn't know that. And but that what you just said just validates, right? That if you're not going to have that shit to sit back into,
then you need
then at some point you got to have some work in there.
Yep.
For them to be there. And it's I've never thought of it in that perspective, but it is because it's what he's saying without saying it.
Yeah, it is. Yep. Yeah. And so, I mean, I get it every now and then. And I think I use a little bit more volume on the supplemental work than you would normally see. And I feel like, because again, you don't have that gear. So I want to be able to give you a little bit more volume with the main work because you can handle it because you're not in a bench shirt. You're not in a squat suit. You don't have to worry about having those absurd loads all the time. Yeah. So you can handle this now where, like, if you're in a shirted bench, after you do your main work, your supplemental might be something for a 5, a set of 5, and that's it. And then you move on to your accessory work and you're done. We're like, raw, if you work up to that big single or double or whatever it is, I usually try to give them 1 or 2 back down sets to reinforce that bad movement pattern because you're also not getting the time under tension that the equipped guys are getting either. Because the lowering phase is way lower. There's way more nuances. You're basically going down straight back up. If you need time under tension in a bad area, we've got to get it usually through reps, not through working on it with gear and whatnot. So,
any other big changes or big things that stand out between the raw and the raw conjugate? I'm trying to think if we're forgetting anything because we went through the whole phase, the supplemental accessories, the max effort, the dynamic.
I always made sure too that I had more regular free squats in there than box squats. I always made sure that I didn't try to lose that movement pattern. Immediately when I get back into barbell work and the hypertrophy stuff's over, we might stick around with the box for a while just to ease in. But eventually, the max effort dynamic, one of those movements is not going to have the box anymore, because I want that free movement pattern to still stay there, and you still need to work on it. And there's nothing wrong with the box squat, but it is a different movement pattern. And if you just box squat and take away, go to the meet, you're probably going to be in for a doozy. So I like to keep that there, but then also, again, by having that free squat, you're going to get more quad elicitation by nature, and so that's going to help your squat.
Well, one of the things that I've seen with raw and box squats is in most cases, when they implement it in the box squat, they're not doing it the same movement
No, it's
pattern
different.
that
It's
they're raw.
different. Yeah, and so when I work with, basically everyone I work with is raw. When they do a box squat, if their knees are coming a little more forward than what you would think with an all west side box squat, I say, hey, you might be able to sit back a little bit more, but don't sit any more forward.
Yeah.
You still need to get that brief stomp on the box, come off the box strong. That stuff needs to stay the same, but you don't have to have as vertical shins as you would think that you need to if you're raw for it to carry over. Now, you can make that a variation, if you're a sumo puller and your hips need developed, get underneath the bar and get that stance a little wider and sit back and develop your hamstrings and watch it help your sumo deadlift. But you don't need that necessarily to help your squat.
Any other questions that you had because that was a big miss. That one, the conjugate one was a huge one that I had on there. Any other topics that you guys want to talk about?
I don't think there was. I think that was a good amount of it.
Yeah. So how do people find you?
You can find me for Instagram. I'm at bsmitley. Our gym's at team.thirst. I'm not on. I have a TikTok, but I never use it. I'm on YouTube a lot, actually. I make a ton of exercise index videos. Part of that's for my staff and myself. But if you're looking for exercises that we actually use, I think I've had 900 of them now. And it's not just a demo. I sit through and I actually say how you're going to program it, coaching cues, walk it through almost like I did with Sheena. But I have that for like 900 exercises.
Yeah.
So that's probably the other place you can find me.
Follow him on Instagram. We have reposted a lot of his tutorials that he does as reels. I believe they're reels.
Yeah, yep.
That are really good. So I definitely follow follow the YouTube. He's also written a boatload of articles for us, programs for us. So there's all that stuff there at elitefts.com.